Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
John was happy today. He had finally made up with his fiancée Christina. In fact, John didn't fight with her at all. Christine had a tendency to get offended and throw tantrums on the spot, as is typical of rich, spoiled girls. But he loved his beauty and did not notice unpleasant flaws in her character, like all lovers. That's why, when John saw a flower stall shining with colorful lights, he stopped his sub to buy the most luxurious bouquet he could find there. After all, Christina had fine taste and high demands, so a bouquet from the supposedly guilty John had to match her status. However, the mood was still spoiled when he came out of the store with a huge bouquet and did not find his car. Such surprises were not to his liking. "Where's my car?" "What kind of mayhem is this?" he shouted to a road worker who was painting the curbs nearby. "Didn't you see the sign or what? Parking is forbidden here." "Your car was taken to the parking lot," the worker replied. "I have a fiancé waiting for me at the restaurant. I can't be late. And I left my phone in the car. I went out for 5 minutes." "How can you do that?" "Yeah, they all go out and get divorced like that." "Shit, the parking lot's around the corner. Pay the fine and go to your fiancé. It's a piece of cake." "Here comes a major with flowers. He won't let people do their jobs," said the road builder. John did not answer him. Every minute was precious to him. But why did he have such bad luck today? He took the bouquet under his arm and ran. And when he saw the sign penalty parking lot, he rushed to the booth where the officer on duty was sitting. "I have my car brought to you here now, a black SUV. Here's the paperwork. I need to pick it up right away. I'm late for an important meeting." "No problem," replied the parking lot employee on duty. "Pay the fine, take your swallow, but I only accept cash." Writing out the receipt and looking for change from the large bill John had given him to pay seemed like an eternity. "You can have change already. Keep the money." "I'm really in a hurry," John said, pleased with the turnaround. The guard obligingly showed him where John's impounded car was parked. The lot itself, where the cars were located, was untidy and shabby. It was evident that the guard had a shoddy attitude. The cars were arranged as they were. One gate was open. His automobile stood a little farther back. The guard took the pads off the wheel and was about to leave, but John stopped him. "Why is the car door open?" he asked the guard. "I don't know. Maybe you forgot to lock it." "What? I sure didn't leave them. You can look on the cameras." "And the keys were definitely there." John slapped his forehead. "You've got to be so careless. There's someone in there." "Look," the guard exclaimed fearfully and pointed his finger at the interior of the car. Suddenly, from inside, someone's palm lay on the glass. It was covered with blood. The hand disappeared, leaving a bloody trace on the car window. And then there was a heartbreaking, inhuman scream. It was a woman. John rushed to the car and opened the back door. What he saw shocked him. He froze for a few seconds and stared in horror at what was happening. "Mother dear, you have an incident here," shouted the watchman, peering out from behind John's shoulder. "Help, I'm going to die," shouted the young girl as loud as she could, and passed out from the pain. "Run, call an ambulance and then get some hot water in here," John Watchman shouted in a commanding voice. He began frantically rummaging through the first aid kit. Finding alcohol, he put it to the laboring woman's face. She woke up. John put a pillow under her head and clean disposable sheeting under her lower body. Luckily, he had a whole pile of them. He often had to carry his dog in the car. There were also clean sheets and towels, which John had luckily picked up from the dry cleaners today. "Don't be afraid, breathe." What did the midwives or whoever it is that deals with pregnant women teach you? "My name is John," he tried to somehow distract the young woman from her fear. "Sarah, my name is Sarah." She began to have contractions. She screamed and squeezed John's hand with such force that he thought something crunched. And then he himself cried out in pain, either from fright at the stranger screaming like a wounded animal, or it was already time. But a second later the baby's head showed. "Now push," John shouted, oblivious to his own pain. Come on, it's going to be okay." And help is on the way, and so the baby was born, a red, defenseless lump with clenched fists. John picked him up, slapped him on the butt to make him cry and take his first breath. Then he wrapped the baby in a clean sheet. John thanked God to himself that he had bought a stove that was so warm and spacious. "Boy, you've got a boy," John announced joyfully. Sarah smiled, but immediately a grimace of searing, unbearable pain contorted her face again. "Mommy, Mommy," she screamed. And again the exertions began in a wave. Another child was born, also a boy, but only a little smaller. He cried on his own and began waving his tiny hands. John quickly swaddled him too. The babies fell silent, warmed in the warmth of the car. Sarah lay exhaustedly under the blanket John had offered. "Thank you. Without your help I'd be lost. My darling sons. I'm so glad everything's all right. Oh, I'm so thirsty, I can't stand it." And John quickly gave her some mineral water. She greedily drank half a bottle and smiled again. "I'm sorry I got your car dirty." The contraction started on the way, and I was carrying my suitcase. I saw the car standing there, and I pulled the door open. I thought, whatever happens, happens. I sat on the back seat, and then I don't remember anything. I guess I blacked out from the pain, and there you are, my hero named John O. I soiled all the seats for you. I'm sorry, come on, what's the chair? The main thing is that the boys are fine, they're all alive, and you did a good job. I almost fainted. Honestly, John laughed. "How's it going in here?" A guard ran up to them with a belated basin of water. "There's an ambulance coming." Wow, you had 2 babies at once. What a mother. A minute later, doctors and a paramedic arrived and carried Sarah into the ambulance. "Twins," John shouted. And for some reason, without knowing why, he felt proud of himself. It was as if they were his children. And it was true. There were no other people's children. I thought I'd give Christine a hint that it's time to become parents. "Where are you taking them?" John asked the ambulance driver. "To Central City," he replied briefly, and turned on the siren. And John stood and looked at the little people he did not know, the little people he had had a hand in saving. His soul overflowed with joy for Sarah and her sons. Of course, John felt proud of himself. He had not expected himself to be so fearless, and was determined to have at least 3 children. With this news and the desire to share the unusual event, John went on a date with Christine. Arriving at the restaurant exactly 2 hours late, he realized that the bride had already left. "And you have a note from Mrs. Barnova," the waiter said, handing John a doubled folded piece of paper. The smile slid off his face as soon as he read the contents of the message. It read as follows: "How could you? I waited for you for an hour. During that time, I realized that you don't care for me at all. Why do I need such a fiancé? What a businessman. My father has more money. And you're not that handsome, you know? I'll find someone better. You bet I will. Good luck. Loser." After these words, John became completely upset. His strength had left him. And no wonder. The day had been absolutely crazy. Not everyone could handle so many problems at once. For some reason, he didn't want to call Christine and make excuses. To withstand the onslaught of his fiancée, you need energy, which he didn't have right now, like a dead battery. But John knew what could restore his strength. A faithful friend waiting for him at home in a hot bath. Half an hour later, John was in the garden of his 2-story house, which he had also taken part in building, anticipating the aroma of birch broom and bath steam. The first thing John did was to flood the small wooden bathhouse in the backyard. Only now he felt how hungry he was when he entered the house. A fluffy whirlwind came at him with a joyous bark. It was Caesar, John's dog, who had recently turned a year old. He was a most faithful companion to his master. "Did you miss me?" John hugged the dog and ruffled his thick coat. Caesar barked merrily and wagged his tail. Then he stood on his hind legs and licked the face of his beloved master. And a couple minutes later, the dog was scrabbling at the door with his paw, hinting that he needed to leave to go about his doggy business. "Okay, you go for a walk, and I'll make you and me something to eat," John said tiredly. There hadn't been a crumb in his mouth since morning. While Caesar ran around the yard and chased the neighbor's cats off the property, John made a simple bachelor's dinner: scrambled eggs and bessia, and a vegetable salad. A good piece of meat with a bone was defrosted for Caesar. Smelling the food through the open kitchen window, Caesar began to beg for home, notifying the neighborhood with his barking that it was time for a snack for such a smart boy and master. "Come on, Stray." John smiled and put a bowl full of food in front of his friend. He licked his master's hand in gratitude. "Why, Caesar? Feel better about yourself? My fiancée left me today and didn't even give me an explanation," John complained to him. "You're the only one who truly loves me and will never betray me. It doesn't matter to you whether I'm rich or poor, handsome or not so handsome. You just love me and that's it." I laid John's head in my lap, as if taking his pain away. Caesar came into the house quite by accident. John had found him at a construction site he was managing. He was just a little puppy, a tiny, half-naked lump who couldn't crawl. He just whimpered, starving and cold. John picked him up, put him in his breast pocket, and took him to the vet. Then the doctor shook his head and said that the newborn was unlikely to survive. But just in case, he prescribed vitamins and antibiotic shots. John didn't give up. He took the puppy out, gently looked after it, and gave the injections himself. In 2 weeks, the puppy was walking, waddling unsteadily on stubby legs. But he ate for 5 people, which made his belly swell to such an extent that the poor dog would laughingly fall over on his side. Experts, having examined the dog, decided that it was a mix of a Caucasian sheepdog with a yard dog. Apparently, the breeder threw out a poor-quality puppy, having separated it from its mother, because no dog in the world will abandon its cub of its own free will. In addition, the dog discovered one interesting peculiarity. At the same time playing with the ball, he could listen to music and sing along, subtle. For this he was named Caesar. A couple hours later, the companions were each asleep in their own beds. John on the couch, still undressed from fatigue, and his 4-legged friend suddenly collapsed next to him on the rug, and no force, even in the form of the beautiful Christine, who hated Caesar, could separate the two friends. In the morning, the phone rang. John jumped up like a scalded man. It was 0900 hours. He had overslept for the first time in his life. "Boss, where are you? Why aren't you picking up the phone?" Worried, the assistant asked. "I had to hold a meeting without you and tell the directors you were sick. What happened? Need any help?" "Oh, sure it happened. Like lots of things," John said in a tired voice. "Yesterday, for example, people were born right in my car. Can you believe that? And then I got dumped by a hot girl on top of that. Just like that." "Yeah, business," Mike replied after a short silence. "Are you okay? By the way, do you know what you can carry to the maternity ward?" "Well, what should be carried in the gears? Maybe some things. You have a daughter, don't you?" "Well, ask my wife and send you the list." "Well, you're really something, brother. Who was even born?" Mike laughed. "Two tough little men," John said and smiled, remembering the babies from yesterday. He suddenly had a strong desire to see Sarah and her newborn babies. Besides, he was curious to know how the young mother had gotten herself into such a strange situation. Having received the list and bought a lot of things, he hurried to the maternity hospital, where yesterday's acquaintance was taken. Seeing the man with huge bags, the nurses became animated. "Oh, what a generous father. And who are you going to, young man?" the midwife asked. "To Sarah's. She gave birth to twins in my car yesterday, John replied cheerfully, and was surprised at the midwife's change in face. In the car, one of them asked, rounding her eyes, and here we thought she was homeless. It's not like she had anything with her. He didn't even have a maternity card, and I bet the poor thing didn't go through any of the women's clinics. We had to put her in an overcrowded room. John felt uncomfortable with the judgmental stares of the women in labor and the clinic staff. That's not my wife. And I'm not a daddy, he said. It just happened. Then why was a stranger giving birth in your car? Asked the old midwife. Well, now I know him. Where's Sarah? John replied. When he entered the room, he immediately identified where she was lying. Next to her was a completely empty bedside table. The other women in the room were full of groceries, clothes, and care products for themselves and their babies. It was obvious that their husbands and relatives had visited them. Sarah, on the other hand, had no one. She was wearing an old, long hospital gown and a lonely glass of water on the table. John's heart ached at the sight. He felt so sorry for Sarah. "Hello, heroic mother," he said with deliberate cheerfulness. John walked over to the bed where she was lying, her back turned to the wall. "Oh, John," she said, "well, you've come. Is all this for me?" "What's all this for?" It was obvious that she had been crying recently. Her eyes were slightly puffy, reddened. John marveled at the warmth and simplicity with which Sarah greeted him. "That's not all. There's a lot of stuff in the car. I'm not a stranger to you after all. Why are you crying?" "I'm just a little upset. I'm remembering my useless life. I've been running around in rooms lately. I worked in Chicago as a dishwasher. They paid me pennies, and then I couldn't even afford a place to live. I had to sleep in train stations or homeless shelters. Was it scary? I was all alone. And here I see, everyone visits moms with babies. No one needs me," Sarah sobbed. "Your sons need you," John reassured her. "Yes, they do. He's right, of course, but we'll have nowhere to go. My fiancé turned me down. My stepdad kicked me out of the house, said he didn't need any freeloaders, but he's drinking with his buddies, drinking our stuff. It's my mom's apartment. Actually, it was fine when she was alive. And now, oh, my poor sons," and Sarah wept bitterly. John had to lift her up to comfort her. He felt he had to help her. "Look, here's an idea," John suggested. "Let's say I hire you as a manager, and now I'm paying you sick pay and maternity leave. Tomorrow I'll get you a payroll card with your passport and rent an apartment for you and the boys. Are you okay with that?" Oh, Sarah couldn't believe her happiness and froze for a moment, staring at John with wide open eyes. "I'd be happy to work for you. Thank you." Taking her passport from her, John went to the office, where he instructed his assistant to handle Sarah's employment and compensation. Meanwhile, enthusiastic women gathered around Sarah's bunk. "What a man," admired her roommates. "Look, Sarah, hold on to him tightly. Do not miss such a golden man." "Come on, girls, I cannot take advantage of his kindness and impose on mistresses. It's not fair." "I was just hired," she replied modestly. The neighbors only smiled. It is true what they say, that from the outside you can see what is going on and who likes who. "Well, well, well," winked the oldest of the women in labor. Sarah just waved her hand and began to look at the presents. The next day, John visited her again to check on the health and well-being of the babies. Besides her, the whole ward was waiting for him. The doctors and patients were wondering what would happen next. Before their eyes, a miracle was happening, as if the audience fell into some movie, where a rich prince takes under the guardianship of a simple girl. And at the end of the story, that John and Sarah, as if did not notice the curious looks, they were absorbed in communication with each other and with the two little babies, which for a couple of days managed to recover and with surprise studied the world around them. John handed her a bank card and a brand new smartphone. Here, as promised. There should be enough there, so don't deny yourself anything. And if you need more, I'll give you some. Just tell me. Our employees receive money twice a month. Payments can be tracked by messages in your phone. I don't even know how to thank you, Sarah was embarrassed. Sometimes I feel like I'm dreaming. It makes me want to pinch myself. Come on, it doesn't cost me much, John said, and people need to be helped. Besides, you and I are already friends, aren't we? Wait till I'm godfather to your boys. By the way, what did you name them? John and Michael, Sarah replied. One in your honor, the other after my dad. He died early, but he was a good father. Thank you. It's my pleasure, John cheered. Okay, I've got to go now. Take care of yourself. I'll come again tomorrow. He said goodbye to the rest of his roommates and walked out, and a crowd of curious people gathered around Sarah again. Sarah, if it's no secret, how much did you get on your card? One of them inquired. I haven't looked yet, Sarah admitted. She picked up her phone, opened the message from the bank, and was stunned. The women came over and peered at the smartphone screen as well. They were filled with curiosity. All were amazed at John's generosity. Wow, that's what I mean. With this money, how much can one live comfortably? Oh, lucky you, Sarah, you got such a great guy, sighed one of the women in labor. Is he married, by the way? I don't know, Sarah sighed and grimaced. In truth, she liked John, of course, but she was afraid to show it, thinking he would see her as a money hunter. And what kind of hunter am I? Thought Sarah Smith with 2 children. But the thought that John might be married made her a little sad. The wardmates noticed this and silently went to their seats. They wanted the poor girl to be happy. Sarah's worries were justified. While John was visiting her in the hospital, Christine was met in one of the restaurants by Marina, the wife of Mike, John's business assistant, the same one who had been making a list of necessary items for Sarah and her children. Why are you out alone without your fiancé? Marina asked. You don't know yet? I left him. Let him bite his elbows now. Who needs him like that? Business nowadays is average, replied Christina. You shouldn't talk about his business like that. Mike said their company is doing well. They got a big order recently. Maybe their luck turned around after that noble deed, Marina informed him. What noble deed? Christina inquired, intrigued by her ex-fiance's sudden career rise. Poor thing, your John gave birth right in his brand new car. Can you believe it? Twins were born, and he visits her every day. Her name is Sarah. I think Marina smiled. Those are his kids. Christina switched to shouting. Why are you yelling? John said the kids aren't his. And it was the first time he'd seen them at all. There you are, you bad girl. Martha was taken aback and walked away, fearing Jessica's tantrums, for which the spoiled rich girl was famous throughout the city. Jessica's inflamed brain was already drawing lewd pictures of John and the stranger. And whose children are they then, if not his? Pissed off badly. Ah, it's Sarah. You turned out to be trickier than me. But the arrogant Jessica could not tolerate such humiliation. So she rushed to the maternity ward to sort things out. Which one of you is Sarah? She shouted as she burst into the room. It's me, Sarah replied. You poor wretched beggar, determined to steal my fiancé away from me. You think you bore him your ugly babies and you're happy. You're such a wretch. Try to come near him. I'll strangle you, yelled the furious bride. My children are not ugly and he is not their father. Get out of here, please, Sarah exclaimed weepingly. I'm not beating off anyone's fiancé. If you don't get out of here yourself, you're on your own. What do you know who my father is? He'd put your kids in an orphanage and you in jail. He'll find something to put you away for. Do you understand me, you thief of other men's men? Get out of here. You died in the wool czar. One of the laboring women got up from the bed and threateningly started to step on Jessica. Are you scaring our babies? Leave her alone, or you'll be out of here upside down, you prairie chicken. Jessica hadn't expected such a rebuff and backed away, looking around like a wounded animal. Slamming the door, Anna ran crying down the hall, escorted by the mocking glances of the staff. On the day of the discharge, John went to pick up Sarah and the children from the maternity hospital. The apartment for them was fully prepared and stocked with everything they needed. He bought flowers and treats for the nursing staff and everyone on the ward. John walked towards the ward with a joyful face. "And Sarah's not here," the roommates said. "She's gone." Gone how? Where John's hands dropped from this unexpected news. Yeah, some crazy blonde girl came by and insulted her in every way possible, threatened her with jail. So Sarah ran away for good. Good thing we talked her into taking your bank card. Otherwise the girl would have disappeared, the old midwife complained. "So where can we find her?" "It's a big city," John said, clutching his head. "I think I know who frightened Sarah." The women just shrugged. "Why did you hurt Sarah? Who gave you the right to act like that?" Jessica had never seen John so furious before. "That's how you'll know how to fend off other people's suitors," Jessica said capriciously. "What fiances? I was just trying to help her out. Besides, you're kind of not my fiancé. Have you forgotten that you dumped me? I'm poor, ugly to you." John resented her. "Whose kids are the kids then?" Jessica asked snidely. "How would I know?" John exclaimed. "It's none of my business. Are you out of your mind to suspect me? I've never cheated on you. God, I'm so glad I didn't propose to you that day. Maybe it was for the best that my car got towed, and I was late for the restaurant." "Sorry, Bunny." Jessica replaced anger with mercy when she realized she was losing such a lucrative party. "You know I have my reasons for acting like this too. Hormones are playing up. Pregnant women are always like that." "What pregnant women? Are you pregnant?" John wondered. "Yeah, that's why I'm freaking out. I'm not happy with myself." Without blushing, Jessica dialed it up on the spot. "That's news," John exclaimed. "Well, it's something to celebrate." "Come on, I want champagne, the most expensive kind," said Jessica. "But you can't have champagne," he said. "Why is that?" pouted the girl. "It's because alcohol is contraindicated for pregnant women." John marveled at such ignorance. "Right, and I'd forgotten all about it. See, it's good to have you," she sang softly. After spending the evening with Jessica, John reflected. He was certainly excited about the baby, but he didn't see Jessica as his wife. He felt in his gut that she wasn't right for him, and if he married her, his life would be a nightmare. This thought John shared with his father, Stephen Gregory, who, from what he heard, came just furious. "I don't even think about leaving Jessica. She's the daughter of my main business partner. You will marry her, and he and I will merge. Our capitals will become a powerful corporation, and Jessica's expecting my grandson. If you don't do as I say, I'll disinherit you. And it's too late to back down. You should have used your head. We don't abandon pregnant women and children," the father decided. "All right, Dad, I'll do it. Schedule the wedding in 3 months," John sighed. "That's good," Stephen Gregory soothed. "Too bad your mother didn't live to see that day." John spent the next 2 months secretly trying to find Sarah, but his attempts were fruitless. Sarah had vanished into thin air. Jessica became even more capricious, speculating on a false pregnancy, which sometimes drove him mad. Rejoiced only one Stephen Gregory and spoiled the future daughter-in-law in every possible way. He even ordered for the future grandson of an expensive children's electric car, which were to be delivered from abroad. But time passed, and Jessica's belly did not grow, which worried the future father. John had already managed to study a ton of books on pregnancy and childbirth, and Jessica, to his surprise, wasn't interested. "When's your ultrasound appointment?" he asked his fiancée one day. "I'll go with you. They should already be able to see the arms, legs. It's so interesting, and I've got a lot of questions piling up for the doctor in a week," Jessica muttered. That evening, the pregnant woman called her friend, telling her of her problem. What am I going to do? How am I going to tell John the first not pregnant? He's going to leave me right away, Jessica, hysterical. I have a miscarriage. It's a piece of cake. If you want, I can help you. I have a doctor I know. He owes my husband a lot of money. He'll make us a miscarriage certificate, and you'll pay the debt for him, advised her friend. While you're a genius, Jessica exclaimed. It looked like she had been saved. Her mood improved immediately, and she poured herself an impressive glass of red wine to celebrate the deed. And the next morning, our cheater went to the corrupt doctor, who arranged everything just right. The case was in the bag. All that remained was to present the news of the miscarriage in such a way as to frighten the gullible John and finally knock him out. Unsuspecting, John sat at his desk and studied the documents. A worried secretary walked in. "John Stevens," she said fearfully, looking at her boss. "The hospital here called to say that your fiancée has had a miscarriage. She is physically in satisfactory condition, but psychologically unstable. Jessica requests that you come for her immediately." "How awful!" exclaimed an astonished John. "So let's go to the hospital immediately." "Wait a minute, though. While you're waiting for the driver from lunch, you could be gone 100 times over. I'll drive myself." John ran out of the office. He didn't wait for the elevator, but went down the emergency stairs, jumping over a step. How could this be? His child was dead, and Jessica must be killing herself with grief. He should be there for her. John, taking his keys out of his pocket on the run, jumped out of the underground parking garage door like a scalded man. After scaring the security guard enough, he didn't remember how he'd ended up on the highway. His SUV was speeding away. Scary images of helpless Jessica and dead babies flashed through John's mind. Tears of grief filled his eyes. He had dreamed of being a father. John didn't notice how he drove into the oncoming lane, overtaking an elderly driver in an old car. But the road was too slippery after the rain, and John was too excited to see the dangerous turn in time. John woke up in a hospital bed. His head and back were hurting badly. A catheter had been placed in his arm, from which a thin tube stretched. A device was beeping nastily next to it. John wanted to sit up, but he couldn't. His legs wouldn't obey him. Not only that, he couldn't feel them at all. "Lie still, patient," the nurse said. Then she turned toward the corridor and shouted, "Doctor, he's awake." "Hello, John." An elderly doctor with glasses looked at the man. "Well, congratulations are in order. Looks like you were born with your shirt on. The car's dented and you're relatively okay. You're a lucky man." The doctor tried to make a joke. "What do you mean I'm fine?" "I can't feel my legs," John said fearfully. "That's the way it should be right now." "But unfortunately not," replied the doctor. "Your legs are inoperative because of the spinal injury. Things should get better after the surgery, but the procedure can only be performed after the body as a whole has recovered. The main thing is that his arms, legs, and head are in place, because, it happens that victims are brought in pieces. The main thing is not to worry, get plenty of rest. It's important now," and the doctor left, leaving orders for the nurse. Soon my father came into the room. His face looked aged and frightened, and there was an addition of gray hair on his head. "Son, I thought I was going to lose you like Mom. What happened? Why were you so driven?" Stephen Gregory asked. "I got word that Jessica had a miscarriage. I was upset and rushed to see her," replied John. The thought of losing his baby made his chest ache. "While you were in a coma, that Jessica of yours found a new suitor and was hanging out with him at nightclubs. She doesn't look like she's grieving for her child. It's entirely possible she had us both fooled. Looks like there was no pregnancy. I had my people take a good look at the doctor who drew a miscarriage on her certificate, and he admitted that he was acting on her orders. Jessica was really after the money, not you. I've completely severed all relations with their family. Those bruises didn't look like they were going to go away that quickly. There's no guarantee her father won't let me down in business too. That bastard hasn't even apologized or visited you once. She's the reason you're here and you could be crippled forever. Stephen Gregory clutched his heart when he heard his father's words. John had lost all interest in life. His eyes dimmed and his face became stony. How come there are people around who don't understand me, John thought. Everyone wants something from me. John no longer cared where he was, what he ate, or what was happening to him. He didn't care about his health at all. That's why he flatly refused any treatments, including physical therapy and exercises. John was always silent, never reacting to anyone. Even when he was brought home, where close friends and colleagues gathered to meet him, he did not care. He sat slumped in his wheelchair with a detached face. A month passed. It was time to prepare for surgery. Stephen Gregory, of course, was most worried about his son's fate. The doctors say you should do special exercises. It will help you overcome post-operative complications, the father said. I don't want to. I don't see the point. I'll do just fine as I am. No one wanted me healthy, and they didn't want me disabled, John replied despondently. Stephen Gregory saw how depressed he was. His father had hired the best therapists for him, but they had all failed. John simply refused to communicate with them. They had over a dozen professional caregivers with medical degrees, but they never lasted more than a week. John's temper had completely deteriorated. No one could endure his caustic remarks and refusal to obey the worker for long. "Take care of your son yourself," shouted the last of the nurses, whom John had pissed off. "You've completely lost your minds. I'm not your slave. I'm not going to take this kind of treatment," and left, slamming the door. Rumors of a harmful invalid quickly spread in the narrow circles of medical workers, and no one else wanted to care for John at any price. This function fell to Stephen Gregory and the elderly housekeeper, who already had a lot to do around the house. Desperate to find a decent caregiver, John's father placed an ad in the local newspaper. There were a lot of applicants, elderly grandmothers who needed care themselves, dashing-looking girls with colorful makeup, and heavy drinkers who could barely stand on their feet, and even a homeless man. Stephen Gregory was quick to turn them all away. One day there was a loud knock at their house. On the threshold stood a modest, pretty woman, who at first sight inspired Stephen Gregory trust, and he invited her into the house. "Hello, are you the one looking for a nurse for a sick man?" she asked. "I don't have a medical degree, but I took care of my grandmother. I can give injections, perform hygiene procedures, feed, take walks, and fill leisure time so that the person is not bored. But I won't be able to stay here overnight for family reasons. Here's my resume, take a look." "Good afternoon. I'm so glad you responded. I think you'd be a good fit for us. Come on, I'll introduce you to my son. He's 30 years old, and he's a good man." Only nervous because of his illness, Stephen Gregory was so pleased to see the nurse that he forgot to ask her name. He knocked on the door leading to John's room. "Who else is there? What do you want?" came the angry voice of Stephen Gregory. The nurse came into the room. When John saw her, he froze with shock at first, and then tears came to his eyes. "Sarah, have you come? I've been looking for you. Where have you been?" Sarah had and ran over to John. She sat down on her knees in front of his chair and began to feel his stiff legs. "Johnny, what's wrong? Can't you walk? How can you?" Anna exclaimed and cried. When Stephen Gregory saw his son's face partly clear, he breathed a sigh of relief. "How do you know each other so well?" he asked. "It's a long story." Dad John finally smiled. "I'll tell you about it later sometime." For the first time in 3 months, he was in high spirits. His father decided not to disturb them, so he simply went to his room, ordering them to serve a dinner tonight. It was necessary to respect the long-awaited guest. "What a sumptuous table," marveled Sarah as she entered the dining room that evening with John, who was cheerfully spinning the wheels of his wheelchair. "It's to show how pleased we are with you." Sarah. Stephen Gregory perked up. "Thank you." "It's a pleasure," she rejoiced. It's even kind of embarrassing to take money from you now." "You go ahead, don't make it up," John replied. "You need the money. I don't need you changing my pants for free. Every labor should be paid for. Especially labor like this, okay? I won't argue. Just don't you worry, John," Sarah said worriedly. "You're not supposed to worry before surgery. Or have you forgotten what we agreed? So did you agree to the operation?" Stephen asked Gregory excitedly. "Of course we need to get back on our feet quickly," John said, and looked at Sarah, who was squeezing his hand tightly. Stephen Gregory realized that his son liked her and was a beneficial influence on him. That reassured him. A mild infatuation never hurt anyone, yet he thought, and invited everyone to the table. While John was busy working on his health, Jessica had managed to dump another beau who she thought was unworthy of her. Finding out that John was on the mend, and that the hated Sarah was living next door to him in his house, jealous Jessica decided to get back at them. She took a pen and a piece of paper and wrote an anonymous letter stating that Sarah was a dangerous, adventurous and wealth hunter who had gotten John pregnant on purpose a year ago and bore him twins. And now she is going to become the mistress of the house and the whole business. And Stephen Gregory himself, Sarah plans to give him to a nursing home to keep him out of the way. The next morning, the letter was sent by courier to Stephen Gregory. Upon reading the anonymous letter, the father was furious. He stormed into Sarah's room. "Is it true that you had children with John?" he asked angrily, glaring his eyes. "Yes, it just so happened," Sarah replied calmly. "Maybe you also like my son?" he asked wryly. "Yes," she admitted honestly. "But John doesn't know anything about it, so that's why you came here to marry him off," Stephen yelled. "I wanted our money, eh? You'll get by." "That's what I just came to work," exclaimed Sarah. "Get out of my house." And Stephen Gregory pointed to the door. Sarah was not allowed to say goodbye to John. There was nothing left for her to do but leave this house. "Where's Sarah?" John asked when he arrived in his wheelchair for breakfast. "I kicked her out," said his father. "What do you want that Anushenko for? There's no need for us to get inbred with her yet." "Oh, really?" John exclaimed. "You've got yourself a baron, and you have no right to control other people's destinies. You once asked me to marry Jessica. And how did that turn out? Look what happened to me." John took offense and went off to the garden near the house. His father remained seated at the table, reading the letter. Half an hour later, he went to apologize to his son and confess that perhaps he had believed the anonymous letter for nothing. But he didn't find John. A search was organized in the street, and even the police were involved. But the stroller tracks broke off on the road. "What have I done?" "You old fool," Stephen Gregory clutched his head and cried. In the evening, he found Sarah's resume where she had left her address, and the next morning he went there. The house was on the very edge of town. Stephen Gregory knocked on the door. He was opened by an elderly landlady who immediately realized who stood before her. The Smith family. All the details of their life were known to everyone in town. The grandmother nodded silently at the room where Sarah and the children were seated. "What do you want?" she asked when she saw the offending man enter. Stephen Gregory was silent. He couldn't find the words, an apology. Besides, his gaze was fixed on two chubby-cheeked babies who were walking amusingly while lying in a crib. "How cute," he said as he approached the children. "I'd forgotten how beautiful babies can be. I'm getting old. I've forgotten how it was when I was young. I've lost my head for business." "I'm sorry, Sarah," snapped at you. "I got an anonymous letter with all sorts of nasty things written about you, so I freaked out. I hurt your feelings. I didn't know what I was talking about. So you had a baby. You had a baby with your son. It's not my business. My business is to provide a decent life for my grandchildren." "All right," she smiled. "But these are not your grandchildren. They're from my fiancée, who's long gone, and John just helped me when I was in dire need. You raised a decent man. I'm the one who should be thanking you for him." When Sarah told the details of her life, Stephen Gregory was ashamed. Who took care of the little ones while you were working here? Asked Grandma Martha, the landlady. I owe her a great deal, said Sarah. So that's it. Pack up with the kids and back to our place of permanent residence. I've got some not so good news though. My John is missing. He went off somewhere in a wheelchair. Never came back, said Stephen Gregory. Missing how? Sarah said worriedly. We have to find him, don't we? What if something happened to him? What if he needs help? What kind of wheelchair-bound invalid are you talking about? Grandma Martha heard everything and decided to cut into the conversation. Isn't it a young man with black hair and a red jacket? Yes, that's him, Stephen and Sarah shouted in unison. So he's staying with Peter, our vagabond. He's so clever. He's got a new tenant. He fixed Peter's television. Yesterday I took the iron to him for repair. Now the iron works as good as new. Sarah ran out into the yard first. Stephen Gregory could hardly keep up with her. When they burst into the old shack, not without a knock, out of breath from running, they found John alive and well. He was sitting there fixing an old electric stove. How did you frighten me, John? Father exclaimed. So you almost gave your father a heart attack, Sarah said menacingly. Well, how can you be such a slacker? You've got surgery coming up. We were worried you'd drive us crazy, Dad said. Sarah, hold me, or I won't serve him now. John laughed loudly and happily. He realized that his two favorite people had found common ground, and it made him happy. Yeah, I want to go home, he said. Where are John and Alex? They're home. They're being looked after. Don't worry, Sarah reassured him. As they walked noisily into Stephen's house, Anna, the housekeeper, splashed her hands together. She was delighted to see the sullen house come alive again. Sarah had allocated the brightest, warmest rooms for the little ones. John personally supervised all the preparations. The father rejoiced at his son's transformation. When evening came and John was playing with the children, Sarah quietly approached Stephen Gregory and hugged him. Thank you for everything, Stephen Gregory, Sarah whispered softly. I'll tell you a secret. John asked me to marry him, and I said yes. Now that's news. Call me Daddy, Sarah, Stephen Gregory said affectionately. A few months later, John was already moving around the house, albeit with a stick, but on his own 2 feet, and gave instructions to a team of workers who were building a warm gazebo in the garden for winter walks with the kids. The operation was a success. In addition, the problem was not as serious as the doctors had feared. That's why John recovered quite quickly. They had the wedding right at the manor house. They didn't invite many guests. They invited only close friends and relatives. The young people were happy. There were good wishes, loud toasts, and of course shouts of bitter. In the midst of the festivities, Jessica showed up uninvited. She was no longer that beautiful girl, but looked depressed and devastated. Everyone fell silent, expecting a trick from the self-loving girl. What insolence was heard from all sides. How dare she come here? I apologize for disturbing your idyll, Jessica said with her head down. I came to apologize to all of you. John, Sarah, I sincerely wish you happiness. Forgive me if you can. Jessica held a small, neatly wrapped gift in her hands, which she placed with trembling hands with the rest of the presentations. John looked disdainfully at her offering. He wanted nothing from the one who had caused his family so much pain. The vow of silence was interrupted by Sarah. She was the one who knew better than anyone what it was like to be a social outcast. Jessica, I don't know about John, but I forgive you. Today is such a happy day, and I don't want to overshadow it. Thank you for the gift. It takes courage to do that, to admit your mistakes. Come on in, make yourself at home. You know everything here better than I do, and Sarah smiled. Jessica, not expecting this kind of participation, cried openly, It was as if something in her soul had burst and the dam of accumulated shame and grief had burst. It was clear that something very bad had happened in her life. Sarah came out from behind the desk and put her arms around her, pulling her close. "Come on, are you going to tell us everything?" she said quietly and pulled Jessica with her. She didn't resist. Obediently, she followed Sarah, realizing that she could get help here. As much as John didn't want to see his ex-fiancée, her state of mind shook him, and he agreed to listen to her. After drinking some soothing drops, Jessica began to pour out her soul. "My father died suddenly of a heart attack a month ago," she began her story. "My mom and I were left all alone. The company's fortunes began to deteriorate because of my father's departure. Investors were afraid to cooperate with us. And then Victor appeared, our savior. I trusted him. He courted me so nicely, said he was a top manager of a big company. He drove an expensive car, gave me luxurious gifts. My mother loved him and wanted him for a son-in-law. Our house was open to him at any time of day. And then Vitya offered to sell the company and invest all my father's money in cryptocurrencies. He promised that now it was growing in value and you could make a lot of money on the difference when reselling it. I transferred all the money to the right wallet, just like he said. I trusted him. And the next day Victor disappeared, moved out of the hotel, and his phone was unavailable. We realized Victor was a fraud. Turns out he even had a rented suit. He robbed us blind. My mom and I had our house foreclosed on. I still have some money left in my account, but it'll be gone soon, and they won't hire me anywhere. They say I don't have experience. That scoundrel, and Jessica showed a photo of her boyfriend on her phone. It's to die for Sarah couldn't help herself. So this is my ex-fiancé Vitya, who swindled the last of my money and ran away when he found out I was pregnant. Now that's a coincidence. Yes, you and I, Jessica, are now unfortunate friends. By the way, I know where he might be holed up. I heard an address he gave to a cab driver once. Let's see if we can get your money back. In the meantime, stay with your mom at our place. I think there's plenty of room for everyone. Can't we just stay friends? I don't have any real girlfriends, Jessica said. And believe me, I've changed. I know what it's like to have no money and rich people looking at you funny. What kind of a fool was I to act like that? You certainly were, Sarah smiled. And they laughed. And then they talked for a long time about something. A strong friendship was budding between them. John decided not to disturb them and went to see his sons, whom he missed very much. The next morning, Jessica wrote a police report on Victor and attached a photo of the fraudster and bank statements to the case file. For his part, John involved an experienced detective. Together they found Victor's trail. And in time, he was already processing the next victim. The money was returned to Jessica. She was happy and bought for her mother and herself a small, cozy house, already much more modest than it was. John, will you let me be your business partner? You're the one I want to entrust the remaining capital to, Jessica asked. Deal. Partner John smiled and looked at his ex-fiancée. He no longer resented her. Jessica had really changed, becoming softer in character and easier to talk to. In addition, her favorite friend Sarah had a positive influence on her. Every evening, John hurried home from work, where his large family was waiting for him. One evening, Peter greeted him and continued trimming the bushes. He was the same hobo who had picked up a freezing John by the roadside when he had run away from home. Peter proved to be an excellent gardener. The garden had been transformed by his arrival. Well done, Peter John said. By the way, your house is almost ready. You can move in a couple of days. As soon as John stepped on the threshold of the house, Caesar came running toward him. On his neck hung a note. The dog wagged his tail and spun around happily, so John had to do his best to get the strange message away from him. When John unfolded the note, he saw the words that every loving man dreams of. You're going to be a daddy again soon. And in the dining room there was a large family waiting for him. A happy father, a wife, 2 sons, a faithful dog, and someone else whose arrival everyone was eagerly awaiting.
Veronica walked down the street, carefully avoiding the puddles left by the recent rain. Her mood was foul. The owner of the rented flat had raised the rent again, although she had vowed not to do so for at least 6 months. Well, how could she not, Veronica? "I can't rent the place out at a loss," said Mrs. Vanessa. "Anyway, I'd like to change the wallpaper. Your kids have ruined it." Veronica looked at her doubtfully. "Mrs. Vanessa, what makes you think my children did it? I don't think your flat was very nice to begin with, but it suited me." The landlady squinted at her. "Well, my dear, I should know better who did it. And if you don't believe me, I have proof. I've got a hidden camera in the flat, so you can't fool me." Veronica's cheeks flushed with indignation. "What do you mean, a hidden camera? Have you been examining me like an insect under a magnifying glass all this time?" Mrs. Vanessa wanted to say something unpleasant, but stopped halfway through, realizing that she had said too much. "Well, don't pout. I just installed it in the kitchen to keep it under control. You know, things happen. Suddenly the tenant at my place drinking alcohol in my absence, and then my flat burned down. I don't need such happiness for nothing." Veronica looked regretfully at the landlady. "How are you not ashamed to talk about such things? I have 3 children. If you forget, what alcohol? And I've never had guests." "Well, I'm not an X-ray to see through people. Trust but verify, as they say," said Mrs. Vanessa, grudgingly. When Veronica caught the uneasy note in her hostess's voice, she didn't want to escalate the situation and tried to bring the conversation to a halt. She had no other place to live. It would take time to find something more or less acceptable. But that was exactly what Veronica didn't have. She worked for the 7th month in the company wife for an hour, which provided cleaning services to clients. In general, she liked the work, a constant change of scenery. The clients are always different. Richly decorated houses attracted the eye with their luxury. Gathering in such rooms, Veronica imagined that one day she would be the owner of such splendor. Of course, it was all just a dream, a fantasy that would never come true under any circumstances, although dreaming is always more pleasant than realizing the harsh reality. Entering the company's office, Veronica was practically nose to nose with the boss, Mr. Oliver. "Veronica's here." "You late again? Or what?" Mr. Oliver asked. Veronica looked anxiously at the clockboard in the lobby and exhaled in relief. "You're joking again, Mr. Oliver. I've been setting 2 alarm clocks since that incident, so I'm not late anymore." The supervisor smiled. "All right, you can't make jokes, but I had my doubts. It's like children. You have 3, don't you?" Yes, Mr. Oliver, that's right." The twin boys, Clinton and Jeffrey, and the youngest daughter, Marion Veronica, looked at the chief suspiciously. Why is he interested in her children? Maybe some kind of bonus or gift, although there are no holidays, she thought. Meanwhile, the boss continued his questions. "Why do you suffer alone? And why doesn't your husband help you?" At the mention of her husband, Veronica embarrassedly lowered her eyes. "What about my husband? We divorced as soon as Marion was born. The boys are not my own, they are adopted. We couldn't have children for a long time. We were desperate. Then one day we went to the cemetery to paint my mother's fence. I saw some kids about 6 years old walking between the graves and collecting food in their bags. But my heart trembled. I called them, gave them money and food. I also found out they were from an orphanage. So I decided to adopt them. My husband didn't seem to mind at first, but when I got pregnant, it was like he was off the chain. But I love my sons like my own, and they love me too." "Wow, you're a heroic mom. You don't see that very often these days. And your husband doesn't help you," the boss persisted. Veronica shook her head sadly. "What kind of help when Bill almost never stays anywhere for a long time, always without money, and himself in debt up to his ears? Marion's alimony was awarded, of course, but it didn't get any better. Still won't pay anything. He says I'd rather go to jail than support this load. Mr. Oliver nodded sympathetically, then said, "All right, Veronica, that's just lyrics. I've got a cleaning order, but it's a big one. I'm warning you, it's 2 floors plus a veranda, and I can't wait for anyone. We're already short-staffed. Oh, and before I forget, try to be as quiet as possible when you're cleaning. All right? Because Master Winston has a temper, and he's always giving me the creepy look. In general, behave like a mouse in his house, okay?" Veronica nodded in agreement. "All right, Mr. Oliver. We'll do everything in the best way possible." The warden smiled once more. "Good. I'm more than satisfied with that answer. But run along and remember, I'm counting on you." Letting this line past her ears, Veronica hurried to the specified address. Somewhere before, she had heard it before. "I'm counting on you, Veronica, at this moment." Without wanting to, Veronica remembered the exact situation in which the phrase had been uttered. It was exactly a year and a half ago, when she was working as a nurse in the surgery department. At that time, they had also tried to motivate her to work as much as possible. And then she was framed, accused of stealing a large sum of money from a patient's purse. Everyone was investigated, not just Veronica. But it was in her coat pocket that one of the large denomination notes was found with a pen mark, which was immediately recognized by the victim. The most upsetting thing for Veronica was that the note was important to the patient precisely because of this unfortunate mark made by the rich man's lover. A phone number, probably, and something else of special value to her. Of course, Veronica did not know how a small part of the stolen money ended up in her pockets. Most likely she was simply framed. But how can you prove your innocence when all the evidence is against you? She was dismissed from her job with a scandal, promising to do everything to make sure that she never again crossed the threshold of a medical institution as an employee. Naturally, the true culprit of the theft was never found. However, Veronica didn't care anymore. What's the use of talking when no one listens to you? At Winston's house, she noticed a massive building with 2 floors. It stood out from the rest of the houses on the same street. Outwardly, the businessman's house looked more like a museum than a dwelling. Cold marble walls, tiled roof, and huge windows overlooking a small garden where peacocks were strolling leisurely. A huge pool with a fountain in the middle of the garden deserved special attention. One could look at such things forever. To Veronica's surprise, the gate was open. After thinking for a while, she decided that it was a logical step on the part of the owner of the house. No matter how you look at it, but her visits were really waiting for her. And the cleaning wouldn't wait either. The only thing that was a little surprising was the lack of security. After all, the territory is large and there is not a soul around. Having passed a huge yard, Veronica approached the front door and carefully pulled the handle. Of course, it was unlocked. Veronica smiled and stepped inside. The large living room was the heart of the house. 3 huge sofas upholstered in beige silk velvet surrounded a gleaming lacquered antique oak coffee table. Narrow windows with lancet arches looked out onto the garden lawn, where plaster figures of animals, gnomes, and other fairy tale characters stood. Remembering that Mr. Oliver had asked her to be quiet, Veronica took off her shoes and slipped into the slippers she had brought with her. The cleaning supplies were in the designated area. Veronica knew that they had been delivered a little earlier to make it easier for the cleaning company employees. "Time to get started," Veronica whispered, and started cleaning. She still hadn't seen the occupants of the house in person, though that was most often the case. Employers leave a key and leave the house while they clean it, so as not to disturb them. But today, being in this house, Veronica felt uncomfortable. As she cleaned room after room, she kept catching herself thinking that she was being watched closely. But how Veronica did not know the answer to that question. Mr. Oliver had told the truth. The house was actually bigger. Finally, it was time to go to the study. Veronica gathered air in her chest and knocked just in case. She was answered by a tense silence. Then she heard a barely audible voice. "Come in." Veronica stepped cautiously inside and almost immediately met the gaze of a man in his early 50s. Winston's hair was solid gray, which spoke of his previous problems and difficulties. "Hello, I'm an employee of the cleaning company wife for an hour." Veronica introduced herself politely and set a bucket and mop on the floor. "I know who you are. There is CCTV installed everywhere in the house. So let's get this cleaned up quickly. Or I'm honestly very busy, the businessman replied in a voice completely devoid of emotion. It was obvious from Winston's face that he wasn't feeling very well. As he did so, Veronica noticed some papers on his desk with distinctive coats of arms and seals. She smiled and got down to business, wielding the mop deftly. Accustomed to such an environment, Veronica tried to ignore the client, thinking about her own thoughts in Winston's office. It smelled of medicine and something else that reminded her of foreign spices. Sunlight streamed through all the windows, literally illuminating the dust dancing in the rays. It was everywhere, on the leather sofa, on the antique paintings, on the oak desk piled with papers, and on the cupboard, whose shelves held many big and small financial secrets. Veronica loved the order she kept in this office, clearing away the clerical rubbish, wiping the dust off the books and furniture so she could hear the pleasant creak of wood under her hand again. Veronica, Winston's velvet voice came through. "That's your name, isn't it? Would you mind if I lay down on the couch? I'm not feeling well, and it'll make it easier for you to clean up." Veronica looked anxiously at the owner of the house, who, without waiting for her answer, had already laid down, covered himself with a warm plaid. "Of course I don't mind," Winston said. Veronica, alarmed at his unnatural pallor. "Are you feeling ill?" "Don't worry, I'm just a little dizzy," replied the businessman in a weak voice. "I have some papers in this cupboard that need tidying up. Would you mind dusting off the shelves and putting everything back?" Veronica nodded in agreement and walked over to the antique cabinet decorated with ornate carvings. Then she carefully opened the doors. The cabinet was full of files and boxes of documents. "Don't worry, Winston. I won't touch anything," she said. "I'll just put it away and dust it off." The businessman nodded and closed his eyes. Veronica set to work. From time to time, she noticed that some of the papers were very old, with yellow edges and faded ink. Their contents were more than just business documents. In some ways, they could be considered a history of Winston's life. There were copies of contracts, newspaper articles with pictures of the young businessman on the front page, and certificates of awards and donations. And then one very strange document caught her eye. It was not a simple typographical sheet, but rather an expensive parchment paper, sealed with stamps and signatures. Veronica immediately realized that it was a businessman's will. However, she did not read it. Instead, she took the document in her hands and turned to put it on the table. At that moment, Veronica tripped over the edge of the mat and awkwardly touched the carafe on the table, spilling water on the will. "Oh God," she cried, grabbing the paper. Veronica immediately tried to dry it by blotting it with paper towels. Unfortunately, the water had managed to leave wet spots on it. At that moment, Winston opened his eyes. "What happened?" he asked in a weak voice. "I spilled water on your document," Veronica said, feeling her heart racing. "What document?" Winston raised himself on his elbows and looked anxiously at the table. "I don't know exactly what it is, but there are notary stamps and signatures everywhere." "It's a will," Winston exclaimed, and a feverish gleam appeared in his eyes. Veronica turned pale. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," she whispered. "I just tripped on the mat." "Yeah, it doesn't matter anymore," Winston said. His voice was hoarse with fatigue. "Whether you tripped or not, the important thing is that now my will is useless." Veronica involuntarily took 2 steps back, feeling guilty about what had happened. "I really don't know what to do now," she said tearfully. "I think you should leave me alone," the owner said without getting up from the sofa. "I don't need any more cleaning. You are free to go." "But I..." Veronica couldn't finish the sentence. "Come on, it's no big deal." "I'm going to call my family lawyer," Winston said. "He'll tell me what to do about the will. It'll probably have to be rewritten." Veronica nodded in agreement, feeling that her awkward actions had put the businessman in a bad light. "Anything else? I told you you're free to go. No help with the will is required." "I don't blame you. It's my fault." "I shouldn't have asked you to dust the cupboard," the businessman said tiredly with one eye closed. Veronica shrugged her shoulders in embarrassment. "No, I've got it all figured out. I'll be on my way then." Winston waved his hand. "Go on, Veronica. Don't worry about what happened. I won't mention it in the reviews." She nodded in agreement and headed for the door. Suddenly, a strange hoarse sound was heard behind her back. Veronica froze. The thought flashed through her mind that something was obviously wrong with Winston. She turned round sharply and immediately saw a frightening picture. The businessman was lying on the sofa with a glassy stare, and his face, twisted with convulsions, looked terrible. He was clearly gasping for air, trying to get air, but his airways were completely blocked by the swelling of his larynx. Veronica immediately realized that the owner of the house needed urgent medical help, which was certainly not available here and now. She was suddenly seized with panic. My God, what am I going to do? An ambulance. That's right, we need to call an ambulance. Veronica went to the telephone set on the edge of the table and started dialing the number with a trembling hand. But whether the machine was defective or she had dialed the wrong combination in her haste, the call had no effect. Tears glistened in her eyes as she remembered that she had forgotten her smartphone on the nightstand at home. At that moment, she became genuinely scared. Hey, is there anyone here? Help, do you hear me? Truth be told, Veronica just couldn't get it into her head that a sick businessman was living all alone in such a huge house. And where was his family? His son, his daughter, his wife, after all. Meanwhile, Winston was getting worse and worse. The rapidly developing oedema had practically cut off the businessman's access to oxygen. Veronica felt for a pulse on the poor man's neck and quickly ascertained that he was still alive. She then lifted his head back to open his airway a little. Although this brought some relief to the host, still short of breath, there was no visible movement on his throat. Veronica realized that somehow the airway itself was blocked. The only option was a tracheotomy, creating an artificial opening in the trachea to allow air to flow into the lungs. As crazy as it sounded, Veronica had no other choice. At that moment, she remembered that a friend from surgery had told her about this extremely complicated procedure some time ago. Quickly taking a small clerical knife out of her desk drawer, she looked around for a disinfectant. Her gaze soon settled on a bottle of hard liquor, which was immediately put to use. Then, gathering air in her chest, she made a small incision in the area of the breathless businessman's Adam's apple. Barely restraining a scream, she inserted a biro into the hole so that it would not close. And at the same instant there was the hoarse sound of breathing. Winston felt a little better, and his face began to take on a healthy color. Veronica wiped the sweat from her forehead. She was ready to faint at that very moment. In fact, she was not a surgeon, and her entire skill was only cleaning the floors in the surgical ward. But on the other hand, in life there are often situations when you have to act according to circumstances, and there is no time to think. Veronica's mind swarmed with thoughts of how she could help Winston until the doctors arrived. Fighting a panic attack, she ran out of the office and looked around for something that might help her. Suddenly, her gaze stopped on a smartphone lying on the windowsill. Most likely it belonged to the owner, or maybe it belonged to someone else, which didn't matter to Veronica right now. Praying to God that there was no lock on the phone, she tried to make a call, and miraculously she did. The emergency team arrived within minutes and Winston was rushed to a local hospital. Veronica, on the other hand, was interviewed by police officers to get to the bottom of what had happened. Overcome with excitement, she began to detail everything that had happened in the office. At that moment, a luxury foreign car stopped at Winston's house, from which got out a tall young man named Richard and his companion with long legs, Judy. As it turned out, the man was the son of a respected businessman, Richard, and his companion, Judy, was his fiancée. Richard was literally boiling with anger. His gaze was ready to burn the unfortunate cleaner, as if she was guilty of something shameful. After all, only a few hours ago, Veronica had saved her father when she had brought the sick man back to life with a quick and skillful movement. But Richard was blinded by prejudice and did not see her act as heroic. In his eyes, Veronica was just a technician, unworthy of his respect. "How dare you do that?" Richard hissed, his lips quivering with anger. "Who gave you the right to touch my father?" Veronica stood still, afraid to make a move. "I was just trying to help," she mumbled. I could see he was getting sick. "Help," Richard shouted mockingly. "What are you, a doctor? You're a cleaner. You're nothing. Do you know what would happen if you were even a millimeter wrong? And there's no telling how it would end." Veronica sighed sadly. Her shoulders slumped under the weight of the accusations. In truth, she didn't know what to say to the angry young man. Richard was clearly against her, and no excuse could change his mind. "You could have killed him," Richard continued, his voice rising. "You're not a doctor. How dare you interfere?" "But I did help," Veronica said timidly. "And your father did feel better after I made the incision." "Didn't anyone ask you to do that?" Richard dismissed it. He'd have been out of it in 5 minutes. "Or did you think you were doing me a favor? You just wanted to show off for my father so you could extort money from him." Veronica's mind was reeling from the humiliation and the blatant lie. How could she say that without knowing the whole situation? She tried hard to hold back the tears that were choking her, not allowing her to concentrate. After all, she hadn't done it to ask for money. She just wanted to help someone who was in trouble. But Richard was too blinded by his pride to realize that. "Get out of here, you dirty little thing," he said coldly. "And don't you dare come near my father or our house again." Veronica nodded and stalked away. "You did the right thing," said Judy, Richard's fiancée, who had been silent the whole time, watching from the sidelines. Richard shook his head. "What else could I say?" "You're a healer," Richard said with a sneer. "What if that cut had made my father lose his voice? What if she'd hit the nerve endings?" And he patted Judy's fiancé on the shoulder. "Don't worry, everything will be fine. The main thing is that Winston's alive, and the rest is just petty stuff. Tell me, do you happen to know? He did not make a will?" Richard raised an eyebrow in surprise. "No, I don't think I've ever heard of such a thing. Why would I need a will? I'm the only heir. What's there to talk about?" Judy had a terrific smile. She really did. "I hadn't thought of that. You're 100% right, especially since it's my 3rd month." Richard's face brightened. "Oh, and when I think of babies, it's just so sweet. Tell me, why can't you come with me to the ultrasound?" "Well, I'm your husband." But she shook her head no. "Don't be naughty. You know I've already arranged it with Laura. I'll show you the video later and make a printout." Richard pouted jokingly. "All right, you're on, just for a little while. You need to be careful now. I'll look after my dad. This is weird. Why did he start choking?" "I checked with the ER doctor. He says the cleaner did the right thing. Maybe it was her who made him sick." And he looked at Judy ironically. In truth, she didn't care what happened to Winston. In her opinion, the businessman had long since become obsolete and therefore had to make room for others. She, for example, as her favorite daughter-in-law, or her son Richard, who in that case would still fall under her influence. Since there was no point in going back to the office now because of the late hour, Veronica went home. She felt like a squeezed lemon. The evening coolness pleasantly cheered Veronica up when she finally reached home. Opening the door with her key, she listened. The living room was quiet. But that didn't mean, of course, that the flat had been quiet all this time. That jubilation of children, like a miniature tornado, had already made a mess. A scattered construction set lay on the floor. A plush elephant missing one ear lurked a little further away. And on the coffee table stood an indestructible fortress made of cubes, with a plastic bucket on top. Veronica sighed. And not so much from fatigue as from the familiar realization that cleaning was waiting for her here too. Mummy's here." The children shouted and swooped down on her, piling on her from 3 sides. With difficulty getting out of their embrace, Veronica said, Now, my good ones, just take off my bag. We've been waiting for you. And we missed you already," the children sang almost in chorus, hanging on her like little kittens. Veronica smiled involuntarily. "I've missed you too, my good ones. How are you doing?" she asked, trying to keep her balance, as the children were magnetically attracted to her, clinging to her from all sides. "We were playing tower," Geoffrey announced proudly, pointing to the impressive structure. "Which we built," Clinton added hastily. "But Marion wanted to make us all tea. But Geoffrey and I refused. She's too young." At that moment, Veronica could not help but laugh. How cute and funny they were at the same time. All right, my little brigands? I'm going to start cleaning up now. And what are you going to do? She asked. We'll help. Of course we will. The twins shouted in unison. Only Marion mumbled something unintelligible. Veronica smiled. The help, of course, was doubtful. But then again, that was the beauty of motherhood. Well, if that's the case, then let's put the cubes in the yellow basket and the toys in the red one. Agreed? The kids immediately enthusiastically rushed to do their mother's tasks. In doing so, they were engaged in a competition, which was to see who could put as many cubes in the basket as possible. Jeffrey, don't throw the dice like that. You might hurt Marion, Veronica said. His mother's words had a calming effect on him. In fact, the kids were very obedient. It was just that in her absence they were possessed by a restless creature that made them naughty and mischievous. Mummy, I almost forgot. We've got a surprise for you, said Jeffrey proudly, and taking her hand, he led her into the kitchen. The children switched on the light, and Veronica gasped in surprise. On the table was one of her favorite dishes, mashed potatoes, fresh salads, a couple of sausages. What is this marvelous thing? She asked, still not believing her eyes. Jeffrey and I cooked it all ourselves, Clinton said proudly. We had our own internet recipes. At that moment, Veronica couldn't hold back tears of joy and gratitude, pulled the children to her and kissed each of them on both cheeks. You are my best cooks, Veronica whispered, barely holding back her tears. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Veronica frowned. Well, here comes the landlady again without warning. What does she want this time? Mrs. Vanessa slowly crossed the threshold. Her face was grim. Veronica felt with all her heart that something was wrong. Veronica, Mrs. Vanessa began, let's talk again about your accommodation. Did something happen to us? She asked anxiously. The thing is, this flat is my only source of income, and prices are going up, said Mrs. Vanessa, and I'd like to raise the rent. Veronica turned pale. She was already saving every penny she could to pay the rent. She could barely make ends meet. Mrs. Vanessa, Veronica began. I'm in a very difficult situation right now. I'm barely making ends meet as it is. I understand, Veronica, she said, but what can you do? In that case, I'll tell you what I'll do. Veronica looked at Mrs. Vanessa warily. What is it? Well, Veronica, I won't beat round the bush, said the landlady, but you must marry my son Norman. If you do, the rent will remain the same. Veronica's breath caught in surprise. Mrs. Vanessa, how is that possible? We don't even know each other. I know, Veronica, the woman replied. But Norman's situation is very bad right now. He needs a wife and children right away. How can I put it? For extenuating circumstances. Why? Veronica asked warily. Oh, what difference does it make? Caught stealing, the landlady said without blinking an eye. And now you need some hard evidence for the court. So he was forced to steal to feed his 3 children. The landlady said without blinking an eye. And you just need to be his wife. For appearances, no innuendo or lovemaking. I don't need that many grandchildren for nothing. At that moment, Veronica saw in her eyes a cold calculation coupled with despair and fear for the fate of her only son. A thief, a drunkard, a son, but still a son. Mrs. Vanessa, Veronica began, but at that moment Marion came running out of the room. Mummy, she shouted. Jeffrey broke my toy. Marion, Veronica said sternly, please go back inside and we'll talk later. But Jeffrey took my toy away from me. Her daughter continued to whine. Veronica shook her head and looked at Mrs. Vanessa. What if I refuse? What if your offer is unacceptable to me? The landlady smiled enigmatically. And then, darling Mrs. Vanessa said, you're in for a nasty surprise. You probably don't know it, but I've already drawn up a report of your children's damage to the property and home. Yes. And don't look at me like that. The report is complete, and if you refuse, you're going to have to pay me to fix the place up. You hear me? Full repairs? What are you talking about? Veronica exclaimed. I've only been renting this flat for 6 months, and it was in a state of disrepair even on the day I moved in. Mrs. Vanessa tensed. You're not very good on me, sweetheart. Do you want to try your luck? Go ahead, but you'll still have to pay the money for the repairs or live with my son until he settles his problems in court. It was only now that Veronica realized she'd walked into a real trap. There really was no way out. Mrs. Vanessa's a con artist. She'd probably set it up so that everyone but herself would have to take the blame. Not knowing what to say, Veronica promised to think about it. At the same time, she realized that she had almost no time to think. All right, darling, I'll come round tomorrow. Just don't do anything stupid, said Mrs. Vanessa. All right? We're adults, aren't we? 'Cause I could go to the social services if I need to. What's Social Security got to do with it? Veronica asked in a shaky voice. The hostess again replied with a wry smile. Well, it has something to do with your children suffering, doesn't it? You work as a cleaner, and the children are hungry 24 hours a day. And when you get your salary, you drink it in a matter of days. You lead an immoral life and survive on the children's allowance. Tears glistened in Veronica's eyes. At that moment, she was ready to just tear this con artist with her bare hands. It's not true. Why are you doing this? Veronica whispered, struggling to pull herself together. Mrs. Vanessa shook her head. Well, what else could it be? Sweetheart, if you can't understand normal words. They give you a carrot, and you're always asking for a stick. Yes, a good carrot the son, a slacker, a convict without 5 minutes, thought Veronica. But she didn't say it out loud. Instead, she said goodbye politely, and finally escorted the landlady out of the flat. Sweat broke out on Veronica's forehead. To say that she was surprised was not to say anything, but what was she to do now? Quarrel with Mrs. Vanessa completely, put herself and the children at risk, or accept her proposal and tolerate this sham marriage? Of course, both decisions were unpleasant for her. But still, Veronica was leaning in favor of the second. After all, she loved her little ones more than anything else in the world. At the same time, Winston woke up in a hospital room, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and alarmingly beeping monitors. His body felt light but lifeless, and his head throbbed with an annoying throbbing noise. But worst of all was the realization that he couldn't breathe on his own. The choking attack had robbed him of the ability to make sounds, and his pleas for help were drowned in the silence of the hospital room, in the fog of Winston's mind. Every now and then, vague images surfaced. He remembered the bleary-eyed cleaning woman who had been there at the critical moment. Despite her trembling hands and panic, she had found the strength to save his life. Memories were gradually forming into a mosaic, and the image of Veronica, his savior, became more and more distinct. He wished he could see her now, to thank her for what she had done for him. At the same time, the businessman was not at all angry that she had flooded his will with water. No big deal, he thought. He would write a new one. Winston's thoughts were interrupted by the creak of the door opening. A tall young woman in a white dressing gown entered. Her face was as if carved in marble, and her eyes radiated cold intelligence and calculation. It was the doctor who had come to speak to him. Winston Terrence, Mrs. Candy said in a well-practiced voice. Are you glad you've come to your senses at last? I have something important to tell you. Do you understand what it is? Even though the choking attack was controlled in time, wasn't it? You're in danger of losing your voice and becoming mute. The damage to your upper respiratory tract was more severe than we realized, and they started much earlier than the choking attack itself. The doctor's words sounded like a judgment dumbness. It was tantamount to a slow death for him. A once outgoing and eloquent man who could go on stage during meals and sing something for the soul. And Winston couldn't imagine his life without the ability to speak, to make deals, to negotiate, which had once paved his way from an ordinary office clerk to the celestials of financial Olympus. At that moment, panic gripped his heart. He looked at the doctor with helplessness in his eyes, hoping to see a glimmer of hope. Winston wanted to scream in despair, but only a barely audible wheeze came out of his mouth. Don't despair, said Mrs. Candy. We'll hope for the best, but you should be prepared for the possibility that the voice may not come back. It's too early to pick up the phone, but don't be discouraged. We'll be starting you on a rehabilitation program soon. I hope it helps. With these words, she left the room, leaving him alone with his distress. Winston closed his eyes, feeling his hope crumble like a house of cards. He felt trapped in his own body, a prisoner, condemned to silence in a world of colors and sounds. Thoughts raced through his mind, trying to find a way out of the situation. But the answer was slipping away like a mirage in the desert. At that moment, he suddenly remembered his son Richard and his wife Judy. After all, they were the ones he had named in his will. And Winston had only included Judy when he learned that she was pregnant with Richard's child. How could he not, he thought. When did Judy become part of their family dynasty? Oh, what if she had a grandchild, or 2 grandchildren? That would be a joy. Wasting no time, Winston scribbled a few words on a piece of paper and handed it to the nurse who entered the room. "Bring my son." She read it, looked at the patient in surprise, and then walked out, closing the door behind her. Of course, Winston realized that Richard would not come to him at a moment's notice, and so he sank into sad memories. The quiet humming of the ventilator brought the businessman back to reality. In addition to the patient's will, his thoughts brought him back to his distant youth, when he was a completely different person. Then Winston, a penniless student, worked part-time as a singer in restaurants to somehow make ends meet, and he was always surrounded by a swarm of admirers. But only one girl stood out from the rest. Her name was Beatrice. She grew up in a poor family. Her clear, high voice and gray, slightly sad eyes captivated him once and for all. One day after his next performance, Winston approached her and asked her out. To his amazement, Beatrice happily agreed. They walked along the narrow alleys of the park, holding hands and chatting about everything in the world. Beatrice's voice flowed like a song, drawing Winston into a sweet world of dreams. She told him about her dreams, her plans for the future. In turn, Winston was struck by the sincerity and kindness of the girl. Soon their dates became frequent. True, they met secretly, fearing judgment from Winston's family. In this case, the parents of the guy were not rich. Not at all. Just in social terms, they were noticeably higher Beatrice, who was brought up by her grandmother. Meanwhile, the feelings of the two lovers blossomed into a lush flower, fueled by the burning passion of forbidden fruit. Unfortunately, as it usually happens on the path of love, there was an insurmountable obstacle in their way: the parents of the groom. They specifically forbade their son to communicate with Beatrice, threatened to disown him if he resisted their will. But the guy did not go about it, intending to fight to the end. And then Winston's father, Mr. Terrence, decided on a desperate step for a heart-to-heart talk with the chief military commander of the city. His father agreed that Winston would be taken into the army, and not somewhere, but to the Navy, where he would definitely forget about his Beatrice. Naturally, the young people knew nothing about it. Beatrice, wishing to reconcile Winston with her family, kept asking her to wait. Due to her naivety, the girl sincerely believed that in time they would be able to persuade her parents to consent to their union. But time was not among their allies. Winston, driven by the desire to succeed and prove his worth to the family, Beatrice diligently studied, worked, not knowing that his father has already decided everything for him. Winston sang hoarsely, hoping that his natural talent would bring him fame and fortune. But ahead of the guy was waiting for his father-initiated expulsion from the institute and 3 years of service on a submarine. Unfortunately, Beatrice stopped writing letters to Winston immediately after he got into the army. What happened to her afterwards, no one knew. As the years passed, Winston served and returned to his hometown, where he reached unprecedented heights in business, becoming one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world. But his heart still belonged to Beatrice. All this time, the businessman tried to find it, but all his attempts were in vain. Beatrice seemed to vanish into thin air. Of course, the wolf loner Winston did not become a loner, and a year after the demobilization married a former classmate, Molly, who gave birth to his son Richard. But this marriage lasted only 12 years, after which the couple divorced, not feeling for each other, absolutely no feelings. The richer and more powerful nor Winston became, the more longing for the bride from the past ate him from the inside. Deep down, Winston knew he had lost true love because of his selfishness and fear of falling out with his parents. If he had put love above his ambition, they could still be together now. And now, lying in a hospital bed, Winston was faced with the harsh truth. His business wealth is all an abomination compared to the immense love he lost in his youth. And Winston also feared that his voice, his body, his reputation were at risk because of his illness. Everything could be ruined. Most of all, he feared the thought of never being able to sing again. Singing was his passion, connecting him to the world of art, where people without talent are forever barred from entering. Without a voice, Winston would be but a mute shadow of his former self. In the darkness of the chamber of happiness was not visible, and bitter tears flowed down his cheeks. He mourned for lost youth, lost voice, and lost love. Through his tears, he mentally whispered the words of an old song he had once sung for Beatrice. Will she ever hear it again? Will he ever get another chance to right his wrongs? Or will his life remain a tragic love song? To this question, Winston knew no answer. Time after time, he had spent huge sums of money on private investigators trying to find traces of Beatrice, but all was in vain. Either the detectives simply drained him of money like leeches, or Beatrice really disappeared without a trace. While Winston reminisced about his past, his son Richard happily watched the video report. The ultrasound room said it's going to be a boy, she said with a smile. Richard's eyes lit up with a sly twinkle. That's a royal gift, he said. Why is it so bad and blurry? I can't see you at all. Judy frowned. You're such a baby. Don't you know Laura? She's always got her hands in the wrong place. You can't even find a smartphone. The quality's a mess. Catching a hint of irritation in her words, Richard backtracked. So what if it doesn't change the point? In 6 months, I'll be a happy dad. What could be better than that? That evening, Veronica stayed up late. Tomorrow, the young mother was to meet Mrs. Vanessa's son, Norman, who she already disliked in absentia. The night passed in anxious expectation of a change in the warm weather. In the morning, sunlight streamed through the curtains, as if flirting with the slumbering woman. Veronica sighed tiredly, threw off the blanket, and got out of bed. Another day was beginning, a day filled with taking care of 3 small children, laundry, cooking, cleaning, and lots of other small and large family chores. But today was a special day, for Veronica was to meet Norman, experiencing great inner turmoil. She made tea, put porridge on the cooker, and tried to forget that today something would happen in their small house that would turn her life upside down. Mentally, the young mother even promised herself that she would try to behave confidently without showing Norman her fear. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. She felt an unpleasant chill run down her spine. Veronica poured herself a cup of tea, took a deep breath, and went to open the door. On the threshold stood a tall, thin man, swarthy, with stiff black hair and piercing brown eyes. He looked older than his years, especially with the dark circles under his eyes and the scar near his upper lip. Norman was wearing a black windbreaker and crumpled jeans, which only added to the negativity of his image. I'm here, he said somewhat gruffly. Veronica felt a wave of anxiety surge through her body. Come in, she said, trying to hide her excitement from her guest. Did your mother tell you that you are to live here now? Yes, why? The guest asked defiantly. Nothing, Veronica nodded. I know about everything and I'm ready to help. I have some things here, Norman continued, and the tension in his voice increased. Can I drop them off? Veronica nodded and stepped aside to let him into the flat. I'll make your bed here, in the room across the hall, she said, realizing she was giving him 1 room out of 3. Good, Norman nodded, as if it were all natural and obvious to him. I don't want to disturb you. He strode noisily into the room, throwing a large rucksack on the floor. Veronica watched him half-heartedly, running through the most unbelievable thoughts in her head. Who was he really? What was in his head? What kind of neighbor would he be? You have children, don't you? Norman asked suddenly, as if he had read her thoughts. Yes, Veronica replied, her eyes fixed on the pictures of the babies on the chest of drawers 3. What are their names? She saw a shadow of sympathy flicker in his eyes, which immediately disappeared as if it had never been there. Not wishing to upset her guest, Veronica said the children's names one by one, spaced out. Norman remained silent, and the young mother realized that from that moment their lives were inevitably intertwined within the walls of this flat. I'll go to the shop, she said, trying to escape the tense silence. Do you need anything? No, not yet, Norman answered, a note of awkwardness in his voice. I can go to the shop tomorrow. Veronica nodded and left the room. Truth be told, she didn't want to be alone with Norman in this house. She wanted a breath of freedom to gather her thoughts and figure out what to do next. She bought groceries, returned home. To Veronica's great amazement, the children were running around the room, chasing a ball. "Mum, who is this uncle living with us?" Beatrice asked. "That's our landlady's son," replied Veronica, trying to find a logical explanation for what was happening. She made breakfast, trying to ignore the fact that Norman was sitting in his room and seemed to be watching her every move. The meal passed in complete silence, interrupted only by the sound of spoons and forks. "I want to talk to you," Norman said, rising from the table after the children have gone out. Veronica nodded, not knowing what to say to him. Deep down, she was afraid of his questions, afraid of the words he might say to her now. "I know you didn't want to live with me," Norman said in a calm voice. Veronica did not hear it as a reproach, but rather as sadness, and it calmed her a little. "I understand you. I know I'm no gift at all. But I really need your help, just for a little while. A month, or even 3 weeks, whatever works." She shook her head sadly. "Well, I don't mind. I know you're in danger of going to jail." "That's true," Norman nodded. "I'm in big trouble, but I'm going to get out of it with the least possible loss to myself." Veronica looked at him incredulously, but did not comment on his words for fear of a possible outbreak of aggression. From that day on, Veronica finally lost her peace. Now she expected some meanness or reproach from Norman every time. But he behaved quite decently. He did not come home drunk, and if he got drunk somewhere, he stayed there overnight. He did not offend the children. From time to time, he even bought them sweets. A week of living together flew by. Winston lay motionless with his eyes closed. His breathing was steady, though accompanied by the hissing of the ventilator. At that moment, a trim young man entered the room. Winston opened his eyes, trying to get a better look at the entrant's face. Finally, he succeeded. The guest was Stephen, the private detective whom Winston had hired a month ago to search for Beatrice. The businessman knew that Stephen had been forced to retire from law enforcement after being shot in the leg, resulting in the replacement of the damaged knee joint with an artificial implant. Stephen silently pulled a chair over to the patient's bedside and placed his bulky leather folder on the table. "I found her after all, Winston," he said. "But Beatrice, that is, she died about 15 years ago of a heart attack. True, she had a very different surname at the time of her death. She took her mother's maiden name, but she still had a daughter. She's all grown up now, though I haven't had a chance to talk to her yet." At this point, Stephen looked at the customer, as if expecting him to respond. But Winston's almost motionless face remained calm. Only his eyelids twitched slightly, indicating that the businessman's brain was in the midst of intense analytical work. "I'll do everything I can to let my daughter know about you as soon as possible," continued Stephen, breaking the silence of the room. "They say Beatrice raised her alone. Do you see where I'm going with this?" He felt the weight of the unspoken words pressing down on him, forcing him to take more active steps. "I have brought you a photograph of Beatrice's daughter," said Stephen, taking out of his pocket a photograph taken with powerful professional optics, secretly, from hiding, but very clear and of high quality. The detective then placed the photograph on the bedside table next to the bed. It showed a woman with the same facial features as Beatrice's, a look that was as delicate and as dear to Winston as she was. "She is lovely with ruddy cheeks and dimples. She is beautiful, just like her mother," said Stephen in a whisper, as if afraid to break the silence. At that moment, the detective looked at Winston and saw tears in his eyes. Stephen sat beside the bed for a while longer, gazing into Winston's pale face. At the same time, the private detective did not even realize that the patient was already familiar with this woman. "Her name is Veronica, isn't it?" Winston asked meaningfully. "Veronica, an employee of the company woman for an hour, who saved him from suffocation, depriving him of the ability to speak." A couple of days later, Winston saw Veronica for himself. True, now he immediately recognized her as his first love, Beatrice. Though he could not do so the first time, being immersed in the drafting of his will. And Winston also saw the smile that he liked Beatrice so much, and the mischievous gleam in her eyes. The businessman felt his heart begin to beat harder, but he could not say a word. "Winston has a hard time talking," Stephen explained to Veronica, though it was unnecessary. "He's had an operation." She nodded. Immediately she realized that Winston couldn't communicate, but still wanted to tell her something very important. "I understand," Veronica said. "I can wait for him to speak." She was silent for a moment, then added, "I can even come again, with the children." Stephen nodded. He saw Winston looking at Veronica, and his eyes were full of anguish and deep longing. She stepped closer to her patient, smiled at him, and tears glistened in her eyes. "I know Mum loved you very much," Veronica said slowly. "I've heard about you from her. I didn't know your name, but I want you to know that my mother was happy with you." Winston nodded discreetly. At that moment, the businessman felt his heart fill with warmth and happiness. He saw in Veronica's eyes the same tenderness that had once been in Beatrice's eyes. And the businessman also realized that he didn't need to say a word for his daughter to understand his feelings. After all, she was the one. And the timeline confirmed it. And so did the DNA test, which they had done by mutual desire. In the days and weeks that followed, Veronica became a frequent visitor to Winston's room. She brought Marion, Clinton, and Jeffrey, who enjoyed drawing colorful pictures for Grandpa and even reading poetry aloud. At first, upon learning of this, Richard resisted, trying to break up father and daughter. Most likely, it was the usual jealousy inherent in most children, regardless of their age and social status. But then the son of a businessman did not care about family disputes, especially when it turned out that Judy all this time deceived him and was not really pregnant. The cunning beauty skillfully lied to her chosen one in order to get him to the wedding as soon as possible. Fear and fictitious pregnancy was the trump card up her sleeve, which she was going to play in the near future. Without knowing it, Veronica had accidentally spoilt the businessman's will, in which Judy's name was on a par with his son's. And so, it was thanks to this coincidence Veronica saved Winston from a rash decision in favor of his daughter-in-law. But that was all in the past now. Now Veronica was telling her father about her life, about her work in the company wife for an hour. Winston, despite his lack of voice, felt happy and kept up his good behavior. Observing the life of his daughter, he became more and more convinced that Beatrice's efforts were not in vain. After all, she left behind a beautiful heiress, who continued to live and enjoy life, despite everything. One day, Veronica once again came to her father in the hospital, holding a photo album containing pictures of her mother. Winston looked at the yellowed photos and wept silently. "My first love," Winston wrote in the notebook. "I know," Veronica said. "Mom told me a lot about how kind you were, how much she loved you, and how well you could sing." Winston smiled. At that moment, he felt truly happy. "Thank you, Veronica. Someday I'll sing to you," he wrote in his notebook, feeling his heart fill with warmth. And the businessman also realized that at that time, when parting at the fault of his parents with Beatrice, it was not his fault. After all, the first and naive love continued to live in their children, grandchildren, and everything that surrounded them in this life. A month flew by, during which Veronica's life changed beyond recognition. Having learnt about his daughter's problems with the landlady, Winston solved this issue by buying her a house outside the city with a view of the forest and the river. Thus, Mrs. Vanessa's son still had to stand trial for what he had done. Now, however, everything was fair, without deceit or innuendo. Richard made peace with his paternal sister and no longer considered her an enemy. Moreover, he began to spend a lot of time with his nephews, whom he loved with all his heart. Winston was lucky he was able to defeat the insidious disease. True, until the end of the voice of the businessman has not returned, because of which he was forced to constantly use a special sound amplifier, fixed in the area of the larynx outside. But he was not discouraged, because ahead of him awaited several extremely pleasant moments, the main of which was to be the wedding of Veronica and Private Detective Stephen, who after meeting in the ward experienced a strong mutual sympathy for each other. Deep down, the businessman believed that he could still sing on stage no matter what, and otherwise, when from the heights of heaven you are watched by your favorite woman, who also, as before, catches your every word and quietly sings along with her quiet, melodious voice. As a child, Linda was considered strange in the yard because she wasn't afraid of dentists either. When other children were being dragged into the dentist's office by their parents with tantrums and faces red from crying, Linda was eager to peek through the narrow slit of the door and see what was going on in there. She wasn't afraid during dental treatment. Maybe because she didn't eat a lot of sweets, or maybe because everything that was going on aroused the girl's keen interest. She followed every movement of the doctors and afterwards asked a million questions, flapping her naive childish eyes. The sound of boron machines, the wonders of filling solidification, white coats. All this was an outlandish world for 8-year-old Linda. It was no surprise to anyone that after graduating from high school, the girl firmly decided to become a dentist. All through high school, she prepared. Diligently, she learned chemical formulas and diligently solved biology tests. Sometimes Linda put on a white coat at home, a cap, and imagined that she was seeing patients. She had once borrowed a doctor's outfit from a neighbor who worked as a pediatrician at the local polyclinic. "And want you, Linda, in the teeth of other people's uncles and aunts to pick," sighed her mother, stirring the borscht in the pot. "But you want to teach cranky children." "Flipping through a book," replied the daughter. "I guess you're like your grandmother," the woman grinned, "only she was treating cattle on the ranch, and you decided to get to people." Linda grinned understandingly. Grandma Emma had worked as a zoo technician in the small town for a long time, until she retired. And even after that, she often came to check the condition of the animals at the request of her superiors and delivered cows in difficult labor. At the same time, grandmother was not shy to cover young graduates of the Veterinary Institute who had just arrived at the ranch and did not even know that it was dangerous to approach cows and horses from behind. When the ranch was disbanded, the tough-on-words elderly woman continued to be called by the local owners. So as long as the small town had at least a couple of cows, there was plenty of work. Emma lived like that, where she had worked half her life in a small town in Kansas. Linda's mom, Aunt Melissa, took a different path. She didn't want to live in a small town and went to a bigger city, hoping to fit in and achieve a rank above honorary milkmaid. However, the bigger town did not treat Melissa as favorably as she would have liked. The woman did not advance further than a primary school teacher, but received in the last years of good work, a small one-room flat. The kind where the kitchen is already cramped for 2 people. It's where Linda was born and raised. No matter how cozy it was under her mother's wing, but at the age of 15, the girl thought about living separately. But no way. The modest salary of a teacher did not allow such a luxury. Her father stayed with them for a short time. Like many truckers, he lived for 2 families, of which neither of them knew. In the end, the man simply did not return from another trip. The mother waited 6 months, and then, gathering her courage, filed for a unilateral divorce. Linda was secretly sad. She loved her father, and she missed his care, advice, and experience. However, after such a prank, her mother did not start any new relationships. She lived with her work and her daughter. The final exams came, followed by the holidays. And now Linda stood in front of the doors of the medical school, struggling with shyness to enter. She had passed by countless times, dreaming of how she would get her student card and credit. But now the familiar outer wall seemed harsh and pressurizing, even though the fulfillment of her dream depended on them. It felt strange. "You're not a sophomore." Someone touched her elbow. Linda turned around and saw a blonde girl with a pointy nose and strange, age-inappropriate, brightly colored hairpins. She looked like a sophomore. Linda opened her student ID. "Yeah, I'm in 2. "Cool." The stranger shone and clapped Linda on the shoulder. "Finally, I found someone. My name is Catherine, by the way." Linda. "Let's go find our group and office." Without waiting for an answer, Catherine pulled her by the arm towards the entrance. The classmate was probably the kick Linda needed to take the next step towards her goal. None of her high school acquaintances had applied to medical school, and she felt inarticulate. There was a sea of new faces around. Many had traveled from other states to study. Only a couple of times did vaguely familiar necks from high school flicker through the crowd. "I came from the state of Michigan that's 1,600 kilometers away," whispered Catherine on the pair. "Where are you from?" "I'm a local." I grew up here in the city, Linda replied. She didn't really want to be reprimanded in her first class, but her roommate apparently liked to talk. On the other hand, she needed to make new friends in the student body. Cool. I'd always wanted to live in the city, but my folks at the ranch wouldn't let me until I graduated. Catherine rolled her eyes. Linda stared blankly at her new acquaintance sunshine skirt, blouse, shoes that had been the trend in town last year, bright shadows and bold lashes. Apparently fashion was delayed in reaching other states. I want to be a beautician in general, because in our small town, no one knows how to take care of themselves. It's poultices, 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 poultices. It's horrible. Catherine snorted so loudly that she caught the teacher's questioning look. When the danger passed, she expressively poked a finger with acid green varnish on her eyelids and whispered, "And I'll be a makeup artist. I've already seen some success. I've made up all my girlfriends for the wedding." "Yes, I'm sure you did." Linda held back a smile, looking at the bright spots on the face of her interlocutor. The pressure, simplicity, and a certain naivety with which Catherine communicated both repelled and attracted at the same time. In her, there was no frosts of the big city as in her girlfriends. There was wooden, like a birch log, openness, inherent in all people from the backwoods. "What are you going to do? Give injections or run around as a nurse?" Catherine blew her fringes out of her eyes and stared questioningly at Linda. "I plan to specialize as a dentist. It's been a dream of mine since childhood," she replied. "Oh, well, you'll change your mind 10 times. Waved her hand. "What if you don't like it?" "It's difficult. Dentists them now as lawyers, pond. I hope it doesn't happen." Linda tried to write down the outline, while the restless Catherine poured her with questions. "Will you do the session by yourself or with assistants?" Catherine nodded conspiratorially at the teacher. "I'd like to do it myself. I'll teach. I'll try for sure." Linda had already realized that the chatty Catherine wouldn't leave her alone until she had no more questions to ask. Before the end of the class, the girl from the countryside had time to talk about how she had settled in the dormitory, about how her mother had packed her bales with things, about her nagging neighbors nagging that her shoes were uncomfortable, about the cute students from the parallel group. Discussed the hair color and outfits of all the girls sitting nearby. Even the color of the lecturer's shoes did not escape her keen nose. Linda's head was spinning, but the funny thing was that she wanted to keep talking to this strange lady. There was something about her that Linda was missing. When the class was over, Catherine suggested going to a cafe nearby, saying that she wanted to understand the difference between the cakes made in the city and those made in the countryside. Gradually, Linda and Catherine became such friends that even their teachers began to call them an inseparable couple. Calm, restrained Linda and the volcanic Catherine. Studying wasn't easy. Linda was warned about it, and teachers at school, and her mother. Medicine does not tolerate dilettantes, and students from the first year were driven mercilessly. Sometimes Linda fell asleep over the notes. Her head was swollen from the incredible amount of information crammed in. Early rising and the long road to the institute also exhausted her. But the main thing was that the childhood dream, even if slowly, but approached her. Catherine did not strain herself so much. She often read magazines on the pairs, could oversleep, and in general perceived going to the institute only as an excuse to dress up. "They'll expel you after the first session," sometimes said Linda, careless friend. "Oh, I just need this crust for a beautician," Catherine waved away. "But for a certificate you need to pass the exam, at least a C," braked her Linda. "I have enough knowledge for a C," confidently declared the fashionista from the backwoods. In fact, Catherine was not so lazy. She just had a different picture of the world. Instead of daily cramming, she preferred to stay up the night before the seminar to answer before forgetting what she had read. She took notes from her neighbors and used textbooks and methods to prop up the wobbly table in her room. Catherine was not lazy, and because she immediately began to look for some part-time jobs. More precisely, they found it themselves, that flyers to hand out in the dormitory. That's something somewhere to carry for a small fee. So by the end of the semester, she was invited to work evening shifts as a barista in a small coffee shop. Catherine brewed coffee a little better than the cleaner, but made eyes at all visitors and smiled at 32 teeth. She left good tips, which the girl used to buy cosmetics and new handbags. Directness and simplicity from the backwoods of Michigan broke through where the urban was difficult. Catherine was not afraid to look silly, and it always played to her advantage. She had a goal, too, and the girl was just going about it in her own way. Linda and Catherine were always fun. She knew the latest gossip, kept a lot of funny stories, could quickly make up her friend in the bathroom before class. On one of the frosty days before the session, Linda stood at the bus stop in the morning and waited for the bus. Several other people were crowding along with her. Time was running out, and the bus was still missing. The grannies behind Linda were getting louder and louder. In the end, a man in an old-fashioned fur hat and a briefcase couldn't stand it any longer and asked the driver of the next bus where the number 14 had gone. "They've all been abolished." He shrugged his shoulders indifferently. "Now you go to the center only with transfers." Rumors that the bus would be abolished had been circulating for a long time. But as it happens, everything happened at the most inopportune moment. The man in the fur hat cursed loudly, not embarrassing the passengers, and began to hurriedly call a taxi. Linda realized that she would have to do the same to avoid being late. As luck would have it, the first class was a seminar with a very picky professor who wouldn't let latecomers in. To get to the institute, Linda gave away all her money, even scraped change out of the furthest pockets. She ran into the auditorium a moment before the bell rang and, breathing loudly, flopped down on the bench next to Catherine. "Where have you been?" "I was already thinking about how to get you off." She pounced on her friend with questions. "My bus doesn't run anymore," Linda complained, laying out her notebook. "I have no idea how to get here now. It's either a detour across the city or a taxi." "So you moved to my dorm," Catherine shouted at once. 5 minutes and you're at school. The main thing is not to forget to brush your teeth." Linda wanted to object, but suddenly realized that the idea wasn't so bad. And if she had to choose between getting up an hour earlier and expensive taxes, Catherine and the dormitory won either way. After all, she'd wanted to live on her own for a long time. Student room fees were ridiculous. She spent more on commuting from home, and she could go to her mum's for the weekends. "I just had a neighbor who moved out, so that, as they say, all the cards were stacked." Catherine theatrically raised her hands to the ceiling. "You'll write an application to the commandant, and they'll move you in quickly." Linda nodded. The time that was spent on the road could be used for more useful purposes, studying, walking, and getting enough sleep. The superintendent was a little nagging when she gave her the papers. "What are you doing?" "You're a local. I need to settle non-residents." The girl kept silent, knowing that she was obliged to settle in. The commandant once again looked at her with the look of a dog wanting to put a dog on a passerby in case of something, but there was no such thing. Eventually she accepted the application and told her the move-in date. As soon as they were out of the dormitory, Catherine squeezed Linda so tightly in her arms that she even squeaked. "Yay, yay, we're together now." Her mother took the news of her daughter's future move with enthusiasm. The flat was cozy, but cramped, and that fact, alas, even a mother's love didn't change. "Don't eat anything bad there," Melissa admonished her daughter, putting towels and a new set of bed linen in her bag. "And don't drink, at my place." She shook her fist expressively, but rather jokingly. "Or that Catherine, your girl, will start to influence you badly," continued the woman. "She's fine." Linda defended her friend. "She's just peculiar." A few days later, on a day off, the girl arrived at the dormitory with her things. Catherine was already waiting for her, helped her to bring everything in, to settle in, showed her where everything was. The room was small, but here Linda had her own separate bed, her own desk, a wardrobe shelf, and a whole wall. All in all, it wasn't too bad. The main thing was that it was a couple of minutes from the uni, and the rest would get used to it. In the evening of the same day, Linda and Catherine were walking down the corridor and suddenly they were called. "Hello, girls." A student peeked out of a nearby room. "Hi, Johnson." Catherine turned and tilted her head to the side, like a magpie looking at a shiny bauble. "What do you want?" "Let's join us, because we, the female company, is not enough." The guy waved his hand invitingly. "We'll feed you, we'll drink you, we won't leave you offended. It's our birthday, after all." Linda tugged Catherine's elbow questioningly. That's Henry Johnson from third year. He's been after me since the beginning of term, she whispered back. He's not bad, but he's a bit of an oaf. And you want to go? Linda took another look at the boy who was persistently beckoning them to come. Why not? Catherine stared at her, puzzled. Tomorrow is Sunday anyway. There's no need to go anywhere. We'll sit, chat, all of us. Nothing to be afraid of. She turned to Johnson. All right, we'll be there soon, just wait. The guy glowered, gave them a thumbs up and disappeared into the room. Linda hesitated for a moment, but then she thought about it. She hadn't really made friends with anyone except Catherine in 6 months of school. Of course, she'd talked to her classmates, but it wasn't the same. And her old school friends came to visit less and less often and wrote shorter and shorter letters. And they didn't understand why they had to go to an institute on the other side of town. Catherine quickly combed her hair, changed from pajama trousers into jeans, found a decent t-shirt in the wardrobe. Linda didn't bother with that. She just tied her hair up. There were 3 guys and a girl in the room, apparently the couple of the birthday boy, tall, thin as a pole, but very hospitable. An old acquaintance beckoned and greeted the girls and introduced the company. This is David, the birthday boy, and his Lady Mary. This is Alex, the future of urban medicine. And this Henry jabbed his finger at a boy sitting on a chair by the window, is Ray from the journalism department. The girls were warmly welcomed and seated at the communal table. After a while, the shyness of acquaintance evaporated without a trace. Everyone was drinking, eating, joking. Mary suggested a game of crocodile. The boys readily moved the bed and, making room, Linda stared blankly at all the new acquaintances. Henry was making small talk with Catherine. It was obvious he liked her. He was trying to put his arm around her, brushing invisible dust from her shoulder, scratching the back of her head. David and Mary had been together for a long time. It was obvious from their communication and warmth towards each other. A note of distant envy even ran through Linda's mind. She had dated a guy in high school, but he had never treated her with the care and warmth that these two did for each other. Alex made occasional jokes about doctors. During breaks when his mouth wasn't full of food, he'd already put a couple of ketchup stains on his t-shirt. But would that stop a man with a big appetite? Ray was the only one Henry introduced differently than the others, and he didn't fit at the table. He sat by the window with a plate in his hands. But that didn't stop the young man from collecting all the stares. He told stories, he joked, he asked provocative questions, he posed picturesquely. Ray's a talker, David snorted. He's a man who's chosen his profession to scratch his tongue. I'd rather scratch my tongue than pick at people. The journalism student made a theatrical grin, which immediately caused the company to laugh. What's wrong with helping people? Linda suddenly asked. Everyone fell silent and stared at her with interest. Ray also looked at the guest. Well, you're not going to help them for free. Or are you going to open a branch of the Mother Teresa Society? He sarcastically teased Linda. I want to help first of all. I go into the profession by the call of my heart, not because it is profitable, said the girl. You need to eat, don't you? So stop covering your ambition with charity. Ray waved his hand at her. Sooner or later, people will become just a means of earning money for you. But some people will make money by talking, and some will see rotten teeth and other unpleasant things in the human body. Ray, come on, this is the 3rd year you've been arguing with us. All professions are needed and all have their talents. David said conciliatingly, let's have a drink and play cards. Linda gave Ray an irritated look, but didn't argue further, so as not to offend the birthday boy. The trouble was, she liked the smug talker. Ray had the typical smarmy looks, chiseled features, dark hair, strong charisma, and a sharp mind. Gradually, the angular conversation blurred and the tension it had created went away. The party had passed midnight when there was a knock on the door. Sugar, David hissed, the commandant's here. Before Linda knew it, the table was covered with a sheet. Mary and Alex were tucked under one bed, Catherine and Henry under another, and she and Ray were shoved into the wardrobe. It all happened so fast that hardly a fly could have flown in that time. The commandant's voice was heard, reprimanding David in a half-toned voice for the noise and mess after lights out, while he did his best to demonstrate the supposedly empty room. And so it was, every time. Ray sighed in Linda's ear, Why don't you just pay your aunt a wage? He'll hide us in the cupboards, you idiot. The wardrobe was cramped. Linda felt her back against the guy's chest and almost stepped on his feet. For some reason, her cheeks were flaming and her tongue was lashing out. Ray gently touched her shoulder, as much as he could do while standing in a wardrobe full of clothes. You'll have to excuse me, okay? It's my nature to pick things apart. That was rude. Without turning round, Linda replied. She could feel the guy's guilty, if guilty, breath on the back of her neck. It was getting stuffy. Let's go out tomorrow, and as an apology, you pick where you want to go. Ray put his hand on her forearm. The commandant let go of the last of her nagging remarks, wagged her finger at David, and made to leave. Goosebumps ran up and down his body, hot and cold at the same time. The tension was back in the air, but lingering, enveloping. Let's go, Linda agreed, to the exhibition of contemporary artists at the gallery. All right, I'll be waiting at 17 at the dormitory. The wardrobe doors swung open. Why aren't you two fighting? David chuckled. Almost. Ray was the first to jump out, winking discreetly at Linda. You all right? Why did they put you and that jerk in there? Catherine clucked, giving the boy a stare. I think we're going on a date with that jerk. Linda whispered quietly, trying to hide her red cheeks and the stupid love sparkle in her eyes. Linda, you have golden hands. The grateful patient smiled goodbye and left the office. Linda took off her gloves and nodded to herself in the mirror. It was for moments like this that she had gone to the dentist's office, for grateful looks and sincere appreciation. And she didn't regret the years she'd spent studying. First 5 in medical school, then residency for another 3. Paperwork for the registrar's office. A dressing gown to take home to wash. So what else, Catherine to call? They were supposed to meet today for a professional holiday. Linda threw on her coat, said goodbye to the girls at the reception desk and hurried to the shop for a cake. Catherine had still had a sweet tooth since uni. No one was home to see her yet. Ray warned that he would be at the agency until the evening. He'd started moonlighting there while he was still at school, and 7 years later he'd taken the editor's chair himself. But Ray had connections with every authority in the city, from vegetable stalls to the prosecutor's office. They were married in college, a year after the relationship and that dorm room meeting. Catherine had convinced her that Ray was good, of course, but he was dapper and pays her. Her mother didn't take the journalism profession seriously. What kind of work is it to gather gossip? Like plowing in a factory or sowing grain, that's a job. She snorted when Linda came to visit at weekends and raved about her boyfriend. Ray was not what he seemed at first glance, nor was he what everyone else saw him as. He could be caring and sensitive, and even restrained his desire to pick at everything. At the same time, remained the soul of the company, a noisy lighter. Many girls openly envied Linda and openly glared at Ray when they appeared at the institute. There's nothing to see here, Catherine waved her hands at them. You're not here for the ballet. Shoo. Although she had initially opposed Linda and Ray's relationship, she soon became an ardent defender of their peace of mind and was even a bridesmaid at the wedding. Not without pride, she told the guests that without her the young people would not have met. It might have seemed that Catherine simply had nothing to do. But how wrong were those who thought so? The backwoods fashionista had affairs with 2 or 3 at a time. Never a dull moment in the evening. Sometimes she chose from several candidates and was not ashamed to use her natural beauty. Those problems that she herself did not want to solve suitors. So Catherine finished her studies, not really knowing what she was studying for. She got her medical degree as a working makeup artist. She did not go to any residency and settled in a beauty studio, having mastered in addition to makeup, hair, and other beauty procedures. From boredom, or from flightiness, married, and 6 months later divorced. Another year fluttered on dates and married again. Catherine wasn't lazy, she was just lucky. She was also never shy about doing things that others disapproved of. That's why she won where others failed. Linda sometimes thought that her road was straight and quiet, where you could see all the stops and bumps for miles ahead. Catherine's road, on the other hand, wiggled like a snake and pitted or went under the clouds. The important thing was that eventually they both ended up with a destination. The tea was getting cold. Linda was already thinking of calling her friend, who was almost an hour late, when she heard a fuss in the entrance and a call. "Can you believe it, you bastard?" The client was late. She held me up. Then the taxi was still running. Catherine started to get indignant. Linda only smiled. They hugged. It couldn't have been any other way. In the past few years, Catherine had changed from a strange backwoods girl with ambitions into a genteel city beauty. She had a bob haircut, was always wearing makeup and fashionably dressed, and she was more concerned with a new skirt and going for a massage than having groceries at home. "Oh, you cooked for Ray." Catherine, barely passing into the kitchen, immediately stuck her nose in the pots on the cooker and in the fridge, and she has borscht and stuffed cabbage and compote. Linda did not chase after brands and hairstyles. She dressed minimalistically and simply, but she knew how to keep things cozy and on time. "Harry's nagging at me because I don't cook," Catherine complained. "Everyone has their talents," Linda reassured her as she poured tea. The friendly chat went on late into the night. It was always like this when they met. The cake was almost over and Linda was making coffee for the third time when Ray finally came home. The young editor was disheveled and twitchy. He came into the kitchen to say a quick hello, hugged his wife and retired to his room, saying he'd had a hard day. "Why is he so sour?" Catherine asked, after a glance at the man. "He must be tired." Linda shrugged her shoulders. "I can't force him to sit down at the table." Come on. Catherine jumped up from her chair and reached for her friend's shoulder. "What is this?" She picked up a red hair with 2 long fingernails and showed it to the stunned Linda. She stopped in surprise. Maybe it was an accident? "Yeah, say it was blown in by the wind. I'm a friend of men. I know them like the back of my hand. He came in tired, with someone else's hair on, and he's working hard, poor man." "What are you implying?" That Linda looked round the room. "I'm not implying anything yet, but I have the fact on my fingers." Catherine shrugged her shoulders. "We need to watch him. Think back. Maybe you had something strange going on." Linda thought about it. Her friend's suspicions had shifted the bricks of her inner fortress just a little, but it was enough to make the building shake. Ray had replaced in Linda the father she had been deprived of. He became both friend and husband at once. The first years they lived soul to soul, understood each other without words, and as if a whole universe was formed in the merger of 2 dissimilar characters. Then they experienced several crises in their relationship. There were quarrels, as with everyone, but they quickly became the past. For the last year they lived a very measured relationship, but loaded professionally. Both worked hard to achieve their goals. Maybe they started to socialize less. "Is everything okay in bed?" Catherine questioned her. "Well, maybe because of the work became a little less." "Yes," agreed Linda. "Yes, what are you bothering at all? There is one hair, and already panic." "Her hair is where it all starts." Catherine raised her finger authoritatively. "I advise you to go through his pockets, sniff his shirts and his laptop too." "I'm not going to sniff his shirts. What's the big deal?" Linda was indignant, although subconsciously doubts were already clinging to her. "And also go to his workplace. Maybe they have a red-headed student trainee there," she said in a conspiratorial whisper. Catherine said in a conspiratorial whisper. They chatted for a while and Catherine went home. "Yes, Lindochka, I almost forgot. My salon will celebrate the anniversary of the opening. Come with Ray. You're my regular at the Willow and Bath Cafe next week, Friday." "We'll come." Of course, Linda nodded. "Smell the shirts." Catherine winked at her, sent her a kiss and disappeared into the lift. Involuntarily, but Linda began to look at her husband. Until Catherine's words, she had never thought to accuse him of cheating. Of course, this fact was vaguely believable, but still. One evening, Linda went through her husband's things. "God, what am I doing?" she asked herself when she actually sniffed the collar of Ray's favorite shirt. It didn't smell suspicious, and there was no hair either. Linda calmed down and put Catherine's words out of her mind. Catherine is Catherine, and her Ray is not like that. She had long ago accepted his job and the need to socialize with loads of people in a day. Whoever her husband might have had a meeting with. It's all nonsense. Ray, we're all right, aren't we? Linda asked on the way to the cafe. She didn't know why she asked. The inner restlessness hadn't completely gone away. Ray turned to her. Yes, why are you suddenly asking? Why am I asking? Linda wondered. You can't tell me Catherine found the hair. You've been away at work lately. We don't talk much, she said. Lindochka, you know that I have a lot of things to do and responsibilities every day. Soon I'll get an assistant and relax a little. Ray smiled at her. Oh, here we are. Catherine was already waiting for them at the entrance. Apparently drunk and in full battle color, she was friends with the owner of the salon and had even bought a small share of the business from her, so she could invite anyone to the party. Linda sometimes wondered where the careless Catherine got the money for such a thing, but the mystery remained a mystery. The mini corporate party was a lot of fun. The women's company was diluted by a few men: the owner's husband, the masseur's boyfriend, and Linda's and Catherine's husbands. Linda didn't know her friend's new husband. She had only seen him at the wedding and couldn't remember where he had come from. Harry looked frankly bored, constantly attached to glasses of champagne, sighed, and very sluggishly participated in the general celebration. The hostess raffled off certificates for free treatments among the guests. Linda successfully won one of them and hurried to please her husband, who went outside for a smoke. She jumped out of the door and looked around puzzled. The only person outside was Catherine, who was on the phone. Have you seen Ray? Her friend asked her. Catherine put the machine away in her purse. Linda, while you participated in the raffle, your husband doused his trousers with wine and went to change, she shouted. And we, came delivery of new manicure tables. Idiots, they mixed up the days. I'm going to go to the salon to get them so Miranda doesn't freak out. Ciao, Linda. I'll be right back. Have fun. Catherine jumped into a taxi and sped away. Puzzled, Linda dialed Ray, who confirmed that he had doused his trousers, would change and be back soon. Miss me? She heard a voice from behind her. Harry emerged from the doorway. Linda answered it automatically. No. They said hello very crumply for the first few minutes. The girl wondered why her husband had not warned her and left so hastily. Let's talk, shall we? I don't know anyone here but you, and there's nothing to talk about with these chickens from the salon. They're all talking about manicures and new hair colors. He yawned tiredly and flicked his lighter. Come on, Linda agreed, realizing she was in a similar situation. Harry asked about his work, his habits, his studies, but only when he was talking about himself. He complained about Catherine, either explicitly or implicitly. Linda realized he was drunk, but for some reason she listened. She'd never talked to someone in such a way about her friend, as if she'd been given a glimpse into a secret suitcase. She cooks once a week, and then some rubbish that's impossible to eat, and I'm used to home-cooked food. My mom was a cook all her life, Harry sighed. You work here from morning till night. You want borscht, to eat cutlets, pies, and she'll buy salads or dumplings, dear. Ugh. But she puts on makeup for 3 hours. Why did you get married then? Cautiously switching to you, asked Linda. She's beautiful. She's so beautiful. You can't take your eyes off her. When I saw her, everything, the veil covered my brain. But now you realize that you can't eat beauty alone. Harry finished smoking, moved closer and whispered. And I gave her money for a share in that damn salon for some reason. I thought she'd stop hanging around there herself. She'd be home to manage and earn an income. No way. Linda suddenly felt sorry for Harry. She realized that his rose-colored glasses had shattered inside. On the one hand, he'd seen who he'd married, and on the other hand, beauty had always fooled men. I'd like a wife like you, Linda, a calm, responsible, homely woman who's ready to raise children. Not plaster chickens in front of the mirror, Harry said, looking into her eyes. Linda was taken aback and pulled her fingers out of Harry's hands, which he had already managed to grab. I don't think that's a good idea, the girl cut him off. We should have gone back inside a long time ago. She turned and walked quickly into the cafe. Her heart was pounding frantically, her head was full of bewilderment and shame, her ears were ticking. Linda sat down in her seat at the table, and poured half a glass of wine. Shall I tell Catherine what happened, the complaints, Harry and the fat hints? She'll start questioning him. They'll have a fight, have to stir it all up again. No, let them deal with their own problems and each other. Linda took a swig of her drink and reached for a sandwich. For some reason, she felt sick to her stomach, and she wanted to hug Ray, but he had disappeared. She phoned. Her husband said he was almost there, but he was stuck in traffic, and finally he walked into the cafe in jeans and a t-shirt. About 10 minutes later, a panting Catherine burst in, desperately arguing on the phone with someone. What kind of idiots are these? This is not a company, this is a quiet horror. Not only did they come on the wrong day, but they almost hurt me. She pointed to a barely visible bruise on her elbow and an abrasion on her forearm. I'm sorry it took so long. Linda. Ray hugged her from behind. The traffic would drive you crazy. Why didn't you warn me? Linda asked the girl. I was standing in the middle of the hall with, pardon me, wet trousers. I don't have time to talk. I hurried to the car and rushed to change my trousers. Ray waved his arms guiltily to the sides. Nearby, Catherine continued to make noise and indignation. Linda calmed down a little when she felt her husband's hand on her arm. On the other side of the table sat a silent Harry, glaring at her through the wall of a clear glass. A few days passed. Linda was finishing up her work at the clinic. She was in a good mood. Her last 8-year-old patient had been a delight to her with his bravery and resilience. He even hugged the doctor's aunt goodbye. And under his mum's proud, embarrassed gaze, he said, "Thank you." Of course, Linda could not just let the little hero leave the office and handed him a brand new toothbrush, which was left by the brand representative for promotional purposes. The young doctor had already said goodbye to all her colleagues and was standing at the door when the phone in her pocket rang. "Linda, help me out." Catherine's voice came through the phone. "Come as a model. My student and I need to practice, and the model is sick, the bastard." Now? Linda was surprised. "Yes, it's urgent." Catherine begged. "Okay, I'll be right there." The girl hung up the phone. Linda often helped her friend. It was not difficult and pleasant. After all, she always came home with beautiful makeup and styling, and Catherine's training was not disrupted. It took Linda about half an hour to get to the salon. She was already waiting, sat in a chair, and under the popular tracks of the radio airwaves, Catherine and her student began to work. The girlfriend was scattered in another round of thanks and scolded the irresponsible model student who didn't show up. When the work was done and the student went home, Catherine suggested that Linda stay and have a cup of coffee. It turned out very well. Catherine looked at the makeup and said, "She's a smart girl. Maybe something good will come out of her." Linda clapped her eyelashes theatrically, turning one side and then the other. At the same time, she caught a glimpse of the old manicure tables. Linda wouldn't have confused them. She'd been to Catherine's workplace so many times she'd already memorized how the tables stood and on which one, how the light from the window fell. "I thought you said you were going to replace the tables." She stared questioningly at her makeup artist friend. "Where are they?" "They turned out to be defective. We sent them back." Catherine waved her hand. "What, all at once?" Linda wondered. "They all had scratched tops. I told you, idiots. Those movers were pounding them against each other like crazy." Catherine brushed the shadow off her friend's cheek with a brush. "Only spoilt our holiday in nerves." "Did they hit you with the tables too?" Linda nodded at the greenish bruise on the makeup artist's elbow. "Yeah." Catherine didn't even look at her arm. "They opened the door as if it were their home. And I got bumped for company." The friends were finishing their coffee and had long ago switched to another topic, when Catherine, who was scrolling through the news feed on her phone, suddenly jumped in. Linda looked. She shoved a machine with a picture open on the screen to Linda's nose. The girl looked at the picture and hesitated. The photo was of the entire staff of the agency where Ray worked. The guys were with some certificates in their hands, apparently another award from the big shots. But another interesting thing was that a young red-haired girl was standing next to Ray. "Aha," Catherine shouted triumphantly. "I told you so, I told you so." I told you so, Linda said, looking at the photograph. I felt sick to my stomach. The nasty feeling from her conversation with Harry and the homespun excitement of finding the red hair again. It's okay, Linda, we'll expose him. Catherine clenched her manicured fingers into a fist, if anything. You'll be the first to file for divorce. What divorce, Catherine? Linda jumped up like a flaming rock. It's not even clear yet. It's as clear as day, dear. Your friend folded her arms authoritatively across her chest. Your ray's gone off and we've got to go over there and pull that redhead's hair out. Right. Linda clenched her hands on her temples. I don't believe in this nonsense. Okay, Catherine agreed. Watch him very carefully this week. Men always get caught up in the little things. I will. Linda nodded. She was tempted to give Catherine a hint about Harry's behavior, but she didn't. Resentment could make a mess of things, especially since Catherine was just drawing her own conclusions. A little obsessively, but for now there was no one to take offense at, and nothing to take offense at. Ray was on his usual behavior. Linda, teased by Catherine's confidence, began to surreptitiously watch her husband, something she usually never did. Linda, until that day, had thought that there was no point in restricting the freedom of a partner, forbidding something, scandals or jealousy scenes. She had realized this when she was still a student, although she loved Ray very much, admired him as a man, as a human being. The more control, the higher the probability of the opposite effect, and to arrange emotional swings with a choleric sanguine like her husband, a noisy and dangerous task. Scenes and emotions to that was enough at work. At home wanted to be calm. He said so himself. During the day, the young editor is a chameleon to adjust to anyone who got to his office, and in the evening, at home wanted to be himself. Feeling like a delinquent schoolgirl, Linda rummaged through her husband's rucksack, his notebook, while he was in the shower. She found a list of phone numbers and women's names on the pages of the notebook and a strange pink-colored pen in his jacket pocket. Her heart pounded, thudding in her ears, as if it had been covered with a bucket. Linda, what are you doing? Ray stood in the doorway, looking at his wife in amazement. The girl froze with the evidence she had found in her hands. Are you accusing me of something? The man folded his arms across his chest. What is it? Linda jabbed her finger at the list of numbers. These are the candidates for the assistant position. The man shrugged his shoulders indifferently. I interviewed them last week. I put them all here. Why? Did you use this? Linda waved a pink girl's pen in the air. First my own. Then I ran out of paste and Kira lent me her writing utensils. What's the problem? Why are you going through my stuff? Ray looked round at the slight mess on the desk. Nostrils dilating, Linda felt like a fool. She mumbled something under her breath, slipped the notebook and pen to her husband, and went into the kitchen. His explanations were very convincing, but the worm of paranoia continued to gnaw its way into her thoughts. Linda squeezed her temples with her hands and sat down at the table in the kitchen. She grabbed her phone and texted Catherine about what had happened. The makeup artist didn't believe her friend's husband's excuses and suggested that she follow up with him to be sure. Linda looked at her schedule, figured something out, and texted back. Come on. Linda went to bed late. Ray was already having his 10th dream when she finally settled down. Before that, she stared at her sleeping husband's face for a long time, trying to find answers to the questions that tormented her. In the morning, she pulled herself together, pretended that nothing had happened, walked Ray to work, and waited for Catherine. Her friend arrived just as Ray drove out of the yard. You ready? Catherine's voice had a poorly concealed excitement, as if she'd been waiting a long time for permission. Do I have a choice? Larissa looked at her as she buckled her seatbelt in the car. Well, you might not like what you see if you see anything. Catherine corrected herself, shrugging her shoulders. But I'd rather not see anything, of course. He's a little distant, Linda murmured as they caught up with Ray on the road and pulled a few cars ahead of them. He seemed fine, but something was wrong. That's how it starts, Catherine nodded, looking down the road. First they get cold feet and then they start lying. Our feminine instincts can't be fooled. Did your previous husband cheat on you? Linda suddenly blurted out for some reason. Katya jerked slightly at the wheel, so surprised by the question. Bill might have cheated, she said uncertainly, but I didn't care anymore. I went out on a date, and I realized I was sick of Bill. Yeah, I felt sorry for him. I didn't tell him, and when he got bored, I filed for divorce. Aren't you afraid that Harry might cheat on you? Linda barely restrained her impulse to spill the truth. Harry? Please. Catherine waved her hand, instantly relaxing. He's in love with me like a dog, always waiting for me. He's not that in love. Linda muttered under her breath so Catherine wouldn't hear. They pulled into the car park outside Ray's work. His car was already there. It was going to be a long ambush. Catherine promptly ran to the nearest stall for coffee and scones. It took until lunchtime to doze in the car. Catherine nudged Linda in the shoulder as Ray came out of the agency with the red-haired girl from the photo. They got in the car and got ready to drive out. Let's go, lovebirds, we'll get them now. Catherine muttered excitedly, twisting the steering wheel. Linda watched her husband's car with bated breath. She recognized the girl in the photo. Ray had said it was his assistant, but was it just that? The answer to that question loomed somewhere on the horizon. The editor and her companion drove down to the city utility into the stationery shop. On the whole, there were no provocative moments, except for the opening of the door. The girl carried a folder of papers, occasionally asking Ray something or answering the phone. He hardly ever took his eyes off the phone, even when he was driving. Yeah, he's holding the door for you. Catherine's eyes widened when she noticed her friend's husband's gesture of kindness. Almost always, Linda replied, following Ray with her eyes. Look, why don't you call him right now, Catherine suggested. Ask him what he's doing and see what the answer is. Linda dialed the number and waited. Ray's phone was busy, but he switched calls almost immediately and picked up. Hi, did you pick up lunch? She blurted out at his hello. No, I'll eat in the canteen. Don't worry, her husband replied in a completely calm voice. All right, Linda stretched out. How was your day? I'm traveling for work. And why are you calling? No reason. Linda sensed that her husband suspected something. I'll see you tonight, bye. Catherine listened to this conversation with her arms folded across her chest. He didn't say he was traveling with a woman. She waggled her eyebrows expressively, hiding. That's right. Her wooden confidence pierced the last shield of doubt in Linda's chest. Why the hell does he even need an assistant? Catherine clasped her hands together. Somehow he's been working on his own for 2 years, and nothing. And now all of a sudden, the ambition of the head of the brain. I don't know. Linda was staring out the window. Tired, I guess. Yeah, from work or your wife. Catherine snorted. Let's go home. Are you drinking white or red? In the evening, Ray found the 2 drunken girlfriends at home. Linda couldn't get Catherine out of the house for about an hour. She was asking for a drink. She was hugging. She was hugging. She was losing something in her bag. Eventually, Harry arrived and took his rambunctious wife himself. He cast a glance at Linda, full of interest and question, and they left. Now her husband seemed to Linda the best and most innocent of men. She fell dreamily asleep, hugging her pillow and whispering something to it with just her lips. Ray sat in the chair and waited for his spouse to fall asleep. He did not scold her, did not lecture her, only set the alarm clock, put a couple of loose pills on the table, and put a glass of water. Then he went out, standing on the threshold of the room as if in doubt, but the second confusion lasted only a moment. The man glanced at Linda, nodded to himself, and closed the bedroom door. Linda became nervous and twitchy. She began to be late for work. For the first time, she snapped at a patient who traveled to her from across town. Linda, maybe you should take a holiday? Sympathetically asked the admin girls at the front desk. Maybe I will, replied the doctor, wrinkling her forehead tensely. She began to notice a cooling in her and Ray's relationship. He hugged her dryly, he forgot the usual little things, or he dropped her calls and called her back. Linda remembered the way the other female students looked at him during their studies. Ray always stood out. He was stately, charismatic, had a great sense of humor and a sharp mind. Next to him, she, no, but felt sometimes that she was falling short. Over the years, Ray had not lost any of his appeal, and even became even brighter. You've got a payday today. Go to the shopping center, buy yourself something, a dress, shoes, and your mood will improve, advised Linda. It was a good idea. In this turmoil, she had almost forgotten that it was the height of summer, and she didn't have to be cramped with stupid jeans and notorious t-shirts. Linda called Catherine and suggested that they go shopping together after work, but her friend said she was busy and refused. In the shopping center, the windows were full of sale posters. Mannequins towered between the rows of clothes. Linda remembered what trousers and styles of dresses Catherine had advised her the day before and began to walk along the racks. After choosing a few options, she went to the fitting room. What a nice surprise she heard behind her when she came out to assess her outfit in the large mirror in front of the booths. Linda turned around and saw Harry. The man had wandered into the mall, apparently for the same reason she had to update his wardrobe. Well, what a surprise. Linda grumbled, "Hello, Harry. The dress fits perfectly." He gave her a thumbs up, "Don't even think about it." This time he was fresh and had a positive attitude. The old memories that had come alive with his appearance slid unpleasantly down my back. "Linda, I wanted to apologize," Harry began, putting his hands behind his head shyly. "I got drunk in that cafe out of nervousness and fatigue, talking rubbish. I'm sorry, I acted like a complete prick." Linda was surprised, pleasantly surprised. "Okay, it happens. What are you doing here?" She glanced round the shop, as if confirming the question. "I closed a nerve-wracking deal at work, exhaled, and decided to buy something I'd been wanting for a while." Harry nodded at the bag from the hardware shop, and the new jeans are a bonus. Linda looked at the jeans appraisingly. "You take them too, don't think twice." She smiled slightly. Even this sudden company in the form of Harry was somehow to her liking. Maybe it was a distraction from her obsessive thoughts. Maybe she needed a counselor, or maybe it was something else. "Catherine's all worked up, and she won't come with me," he said as they left the shop. "Me too, she's busy today," Linda confirmed. "How about a coffee?" Harry suggested, "or was there something else you wanted to buy?" Larissa thought that the lingerie shopping would have to be postponed and nodded in agreement, approving the idea of coffee at the checkout. At the cafeteria checkout, she dashed over to pay herself, but Harry was the first to arrive and put a flavored drink and a small dessert in front of her, the latter of which Linda hadn't ordered. "Oh, come on. As the husband of my best friend." Harry waved his hand. "We're practically related." He didn't get a chance to say anything before he heard a text message from the bank. "What was that for?" Harry stared sourly at Linda, looking at the balance on the card. "Almost, but not relatives." The girl commented briefly. They chatted, then went back down to the shopping floors and wandered for a long time, choosing one pretty thing or another. Linda sensed that Harry was enjoying himself with her. He didn't turn on that whiner in the cafe anymore, but was cheerful and somehow relaxed at the same time. He talked about all sorts of funny situations at work, reminiscing about old friends and years of schooling. There was even room for a story about his childhood and Harry's fun holidays as a first grader in a small town. Listening to all of this, Linda did the most important thing. She took her mind off the intrusive thoughts of her husband's outings. She had to get home. It was nearing evening and Linda hailed a taxi as they stood at the entrance to the shopping center. "Thanks for the company at the mall," Linda smiled as the car pulled up. "Thank you for the pleasant walk. Maybe we can do it again sometime?" Harry opened the taxi door for her. "It's probably not the right thing to do," Linda hesitated. Harry gave her a quick peck on the cheek and said, "Well, you're a big girl. It's time you prioritized what's right." Linda drove home dazed, outraged, and flattered, a rattling mixture of all the emotions of the last few days. Resentment towards her husband, worry about their private life, irritation, and into all of it sprinkled sparks of innuendo from Harry. It wasn't right. It wasn't nice that she was having coffee with her best friend's husband who was making ambiguous hints to her for the second time. Why? Well, of course she knew why. She knew that she loved Ray. She knew that she valued Catherine as a friend and loved one, and she knew that she wasn't ready to go for what Harry was veiledly offering her. All plain and simple. But then why is she flattered by his attention? Is it not compensation for a grudge from Ray? How long has it been since he spent almost half of his day off with her? The more Linda thought about it, the more the questions became, leading her into the wilds or to an unpleasant crossroads. Tomorrow I'll talk to Ray straight, Linda decided, and I'll tell Catherine the truth about her husband. That'll be the right way to prioritize. The next day Linda had few patience, so she got off early after work. On the way she received a call from a nervous Ray, asking her to bring the work phone she had forgotten at home. On the way she thought about the best words to say to her friend and her husband. She decided to start with the first one. She dialed Catherine's number and proposed to meet in the evening. The makeup artist happily sang into the phone about her agreement and even asked if she should dress up. "No, we'll just sit around," came the reply. As Linda entered the flat, she heard Ray's work phone ringing. She picked it up from the mirror in the hallway and glanced absently at the screen. There were about 10 missed calls. "Will computers? Information bridge," Linda mumbled, flicking through the screen on her smartphone. She was already getting into a taxi when a text message sent around 1 o'clock in the morning caught her eye. "I missed you, my affectionate boss. Looking forward to tomorrow." Linda felt as if she had been splashed with cold water. There it was. Her suspicions, here in her hands on the screen of her husband's phone. Tears welled up in her eyes, her nose stung, and her throat was filled with rage and jealousy. Linda caught her own gaze in the rearview mirror and was taken aback. She was looking at an angry and deceived woman who wanted revenge and justice. All plans to talk to her husband were forgotten in a moment. "Boss," Linda hissed, clutching the phone so tightly that it almost cracked. The taxi driver involuntarily glanced at the passenger. He could sense with his spinal cord that something was going on behind him. The only thing the girl managed to do before jealousy finally drowned her in its cauldron was to write down the number the text message had been sent from. Linda burst into the agency's office with flaming cheeks. The staff said hello to her, but the girl didn't hear. She yanked Ray's office door open to the astonished stares, but it wouldn't budge. "Ray," at lunch, said a fellow journalism student timidly, emerging from the right. He was the first one to catch Linda's furious gaze. "We'll wait for him here." Linda glanced angrily at the assistant's empty chair next to the office and plumped down in her chair, tapping her fingers on the desktop. The whole office stared at her with a mixture of fear and bewilderment. Someone had apparently called Ray on the sly, and he came rushing in a few minutes later. "How's it good, sweetheart?" Linda got up from her chair and angrily shoved the phone screen with the message into his nose. At the same time, she glared angrily at Kira, who was frozen in the doorway behind the boss with a stack of documents. "Linda, what's the gig?" Ray tried to pull his wife into the office. "Come on, let's talk calmly." Linda pulled out of her husband's arms and expressively raised her hand with the phone, showing it to the whole office. "No, why? I want everyone to know what a wonderful person you are." She emphasized the word wonderful, a decent boss and a faithful husband. Ray clutched his head, feeling Spanish shame for his wife. "And you should be," Linda pointed her finger at a stunned Kira, "ashamed of yourself for messing around with a married man." "Linda, stop it." Ray grabbed his wife in an arm and dragged her forcefully into his office. Let me go, you traitor." Linda lashed out, hitting her hand on the door. Annoyed Ray sat his wife in his chair and loomed over her. "What did you do? And even if it's such an emergency, why the show? What are you trying to accomplish?" Linda looked at him with eyes red with rage and tears. She shoved the work phone and the message on it in her husband's face again. "How do you explain this? Sleeping with your young assistant, huh? That's it. The old wife is no longer honored." "Linda, have you lost your mind?" Ray rubbed the bridge of his nose and exhaled. Somebody obviously got the wrong number in the heat of the moment. I even know Linda crossed her arms over her chest, That red head with the hair you come home with. Jesus, don't you have anything better to do than look for other people's hair on my shirts? Ray rolled his eyes. Find something more productive to do. And Kira has a fiancé, just so you know. And you call your Kira's number, and we'll find out if she's wrong or not. Linda demanded with clenched fists. Everything inside her was boiling with rage and responded with a new wave to every phrase of her husband. Her back was soaked, her cheeks and forehead were burning. Ray picked up his work smartphone and pressed the speakerphone during a call. The answering machine's electronic voice came through the receiver. It rang several times, but to no avail. That doesn't prove anything, Linda said. Linda, go home. Please stop embarrassing me in front of my subordinates, Ray asked in a very firm, quiet voice, turning away to the window. The girl felt that her claims were being ignored, that it was as if everyone was laughing at her in her voice without being embarrassed about it. Why did it say the word supervisor? She threw back at Ray, grabbing the doorknob. I have no idea. As if there weren't enough bosses in town, Ray replied without turning round. Linda stepped out of her husband's office, and a dozen curious eyes stared at her. She walked briskly down the corridor, not looking at anyone, and on the way out of the building she saw Kira standing by the car park. She was being hugged and apparently comforted by some guy. Linda froze for a moment, and then shame came over her in a wave that burned her from the inside out. Tears held back for so long tore down the barrier and dripped from her eyes. It's okay. It's okay. Linda. Catherine counted drops of valerian. Men, they are so dodgy, cunning, but do not cry because of it. Appreciate your dignity. She handed Linda a glass of water and a sedative. Catherine arrived as soon as she heard her friend's unintelligible voice mixed with crying. Catherine, I've embarrassed him. She took the glass with a shaky hand, and him and me. I'm anticipating a story on their website editor's sleep-deprived ex-wife breaks into office. Oh my God, that's embarrassing. Linda was in tears again. She hadn't been able to calm down for about an hour. Well, Catherine said, at least you're remembered. Why do you have to go there anyway? I'm such an idiot. Linda leaned into her friend's shoulder. We're all a little bit stupid. Catherine gently put her palm on her head. Why did you call me this afternoon? Linda realized that she couldn't handle another confrontation today. I just wanted to chat, she said, maybe go shopping. Well, we're not going out now. No foundation can hide your puffy eyes. I'm telling you as an expert. Catherine raised her finger to the ceiling, which made Linda smile a little. What are you going to do about Ray? I don't believe in random messages. I don't know, maybe I'm just really paranoid. Linda leaned back against the sofa and stared at the ceiling. If so, I should apologize. I'd still dig. Catherine did not stop. It would be reckless of him to sleep with his almost secretary. It's like a joke situation. There's someone else, that's for sure. I'll talk to him, Linda breathed out, if I could. For some reason, she dialed the number she had copied from her husband's phone again. And once again it was answered by the monotonous muttering of an electronic robot. Ray came home late that evening, but Linda still waited for him. Her husband looked at her glumly and, without a word, left for the shower. Ray, I'm sorry. Linda waited for him in the room. The man walked past her, shaking his head. I'll forgive you, Linda, but my reputation is ruined by your tantrum today. There'll be whispers behind my back, and I gave Kira the day off. I was wrong, Ray. Linda stared sorrowfully at the floor. I'm so ashamed. I was so ashamed. Ray sat down on the other side of the couch. You've turned into some kind of paranoid neurotic, haven't you? Going through my things, sniffing my hair, doing this and that, because of some stupid mistake by some stranger, whoever the hell she is. It just seemed to me that our relationship had grown cold, Linda murmured quietly. When it seems, darling, it's customary to cross yourself, Ray muttered. You're playing the jealous wife, aren't you? The idea had failed. But Catherine said, Linda began. Oh, you and Catherine should be in the yellow ward together with ideas like that. Her husband came at her again. She doesn't know what she's listening to. She can't see what's under her nose, but she's giving you the best advice. She herself has a husband who walks left and right. All of a sudden, Ray stopped halfway through the sentence. It looked as if he'd said something unnecessary, and now he was trying to figure out how to put it back. Linda's ears perked up. Anyway, the man squeezed the bridge of his nose with his fingers and closed his eyes. Take a sedative and don't talk to Catherine about any of this nonsense. She's a bad influence. Ray got up and left the room, signaling that the conversation was over. Linda was left sitting alone in the dark, confused and full of doubt. Ray knows something about Harry but keeps quiet, male solidarity or something. And why is he suddenly so against Catherine? The tormented Linda paid no attention to her husband's real coldness and his blatant unwillingness to address the problem and forgive her. A week passed. Life went on as usual. The head doctor of the clinic informed Linda that she and 2 other young dentists were going to a 3-day conference in another city. The girl was even a little happy about this turn of events. It might help her take her mind off her worries, although outwardly no one would have found any reason to do so in Linda's life. Her husband was friendly to her. Catherine still called and chattered like a magpie about everything. The patients hadn't decreased. But behind the outer mask of normality was the affable coldness of her husband, a girlfriend drowned in rhinestones, and a job that suddenly became exhausting and drained all her energy. Linda could never find the strength to talk to her friend about her spouse. She had no proof on her hands except her own words. No, enough with the suspicions. I'd better get my own family in order first. Ray agreed that the trip would be good for his wife and even bought her a train ticket. Go listen to some smart guys and aunts, go for a walk, and get all the nonsense out of your head, he told Linda as she packed her traveling bag. The train was tapping its wheels. The girl rarely traveled by train, and each time it was a bit of a novelty. Colleagues were arguing animatedly nearby to the clinking of the glass of the cup holders. Maybe Ray's right, I am paranoid. He and I have been together since we were 18, and there's never been any occasion, Linda thought, looking out the window at the passing railway stations and Christmas trees. And the amount of stares at him at uni, I didn't care then, well, hardly. Yes, it's all Catherine's way of panicking herself and others. Whether it was the monotonous choo-choo-choo that chased away the bad thoughts or the atmosphere of the journey, Linda was in a pleasant mood. She put her head down on the iron and freshly laundered linen. I'll be back and we'll definitely go to Grandma's in Iowa, Linda decided and closed her eyes. Training in the company of the sea and the sun really did the girl good. In the morning, she and her colleagues listened to seminars of experienced doctors and presentations of new materials for work, and in the afternoon they went to the beach to sunbathe and swim. The sea climate and fresh air seemed to erase her worries from her mind. Linda thought about how she would return home, how she would tell Ray about the trip, how the 2 of them would go to the place where the malachite was mined. It's a shame Catherine isn't with me, the girl thought as she watched the waves. She said she hadn't been to the sea for a couple of years. Linda really wanted to share her peacefulness with her loved ones. After all, her colleagues were only colleagues. On the 3rd day, the organizers said that the last speaker couldn't come due to illness, apologized to the participants and informed them that the training was closed. Linda decided not to stay one more day in the hotel with the others, but bought a ticket on the same day and went home. Here's a surprise for Ray, I'll be home early. And with a tan too, she smiled as she looked out the window at the sea. The train arrived at its destination early in the morning. On the journey, Linda had a nice chat with her neighbor and her grandson of 9 years. Granny treated the girl to fruit and enjoyed listening to her stories about work, recalling her own youth. The morning city was just waking up, washed by the night rain. It was not as warm as the sea, and even a little fresh. Outside the window of the taxi passed sleepy alleys and early joggers. In the alleys, the first rays of sunshine dispersed the foggy remnants, played in the puddles and glimmered drops on bushes and tree branches. The taxi driver helped her unload her bag, wished her a good day, and drove off to his new passengers. Linda thought about how she would go up to the flat, go in quietly and get into bed with Ray asleep. How nice that today was her husband's day off and they would be able to sleep through lunch together, then make coffee and talk about the upcoming trip. Linda quietly turned the key in the lock so as not to wake Ray. Quietly, she walked into the flat, and as soon as she saw the familiar corridor, she was dumbfounded. All the good cheer she'd brought with her from the sea had gone down and shattered into tiny pieces. Her heart pounded like the wheels of the train that had brought her back here. There were shoes lying in the corridor that she would have recognized out of 100. They'd bought them together last year and had picked up the last pair in town. The shoes were Catherine's. By the mirror, however, Linda saw her keys and the same painfully familiar car fob. For a moment, a childish, naive thought crept into her head. Maybe something's happened and Catherine's come to ask for help. But the thought was immediately suffocated by the falling curtain of obviousness. From the bedroom, Linda heard soft voices. It seemed to her that her heart was pounding so that the neighbors could hear her. The girl crept quietly to the door and froze, listening to what was going on behind it. I almost talked him into buying me the salon outright from Miranda. A familiar female voice sounded. Will you get a divorce as soon as the deal is official? The husband's voice answered him. The same day. When are you going to file the papers? I'm thinking of what to tell her, followed a sigh. The idea of a fake affair has failed. It failed because someone left their work phone at home, the woman's voice interrupted. I've been working her as hard as I can. A little bit more, and she would have filed for divorce herself. We would have come out dry. And now you either have to talk to her head on, or think of something else. In the forehead is a pity. I don't like her as a woman, but as a human being, I pity her. And it is not a pity to make a show, smirked a female voice. I choose the lesser of two evils, said the male voice. Linda clamped her hands over her mouth and felt the corners of her eyes grow wet. A wave of cold swept down her back, her cheeks felt hot, and her throat felt like it was being squeezed by invisible hands. Her realization fell in pieces, and each was nastier than the last. It burned, drained away all the good inside, like acid. Ray, you and I tried it back in college, but you were too right then, and I was too stupid. But if it had worked, then, Catherine's voice sounded quietly, but ingratiatingly, might not have been these long years with a bore from the dentist. My husband might not have been there, and now everything would be easier, and we'd be living somewhere abroad by now. If everything works out, it will Ray confirmed. We'll run the salon remotely. You run the salon and I'll run the agency. Linda felt the tears wet her t-shirt and imprinted hot drops on her chest. We'll be gone, and they might have something with Harry. I've seen the way he looks at her, he chuckled from behind the door. I've seen the way he looks at her. She's the perfect girl for Linda. She loves dumplings, borscht, and watching soap operas at night. She's always been a little short for you. She loves her job and doesn't like herself very much, said Ray. We live like neighbors. I'm tired of the homegirl who always has everything planned. I feel like an old man around her. I want something different. I know what you want, Ray. What do you want, Ray? Catherine cooed. From across the room there was a commotion. Linda sat against the wall outside the door, shaking with shame, pity, disgust, resentment, and betrayal of the two people she thought were closest to her, after her mother. The last bit of realization poured out, the cup was empty. The cold hands of reality finally closed around her throat. She jumped up and flung herself out of the flat in what she was wearing. The street, the morning, Linda ran away from the shame and disgrace she had lived in for so many years. She was disgusted with her own existence. She wanted to forget, to erase her memory. She wanted to go back 10 years, to pull her hand out of Catherine's fingers, to send the smug, insolent man to the dormitory. Every year that passed was like a rod whipping her in the back, leaving deep wounds and triple the pain that came on more and more. Tears welled up in her eyes. Everything was cloudy and barely recognizable. She stopped, breathed, and ran again. She was shouted at by passers-by, but Linda didn't hear, didn't see. She wanted to hide from this vile feeling, from herself. Girl, look out, was the last shred of reality that imprinted itself on her memory before pain and darkness overrode her. The measured sounds of the PI snapped Linda out of oblivion. She also thought irritably, what was that nasty beeping sound like the trills of an electronic alarm clock from the past? Her eyes struggled to open, her body felt woozy, her right leg felt petrified and wouldn't move. My entire right side responded with painful tightening when I tried to turn around on the bed, and my head was buzzing. "Good morning. You're finally awake, Linda," greeted her by a woman in a white dressing gown. Linda looked around and only then realized she was in a hospital bed. What happened to me? She looked at the leg in a cast sticking out from under the blanket. "You were hit by a car. I'm surprised you got away with a broken leg, mild concussion, and moderate bruises," the doctor replied. Looking through the documents, they pick up other people in pieces in such cases. "You were born with your shirt on. Your family will be happy to know that you'll be well soon." Not all the family. Linda turned her back to the wall. "Is there someone coming to call your relatives?" the doctor asked. "Tell my husband I was hit by a car and I'm dead. I can't go back. I don't want to see him again, and I don't want to see her," Everlinda said, without turning round. The doctor shook her head. "If they come, don't let them in my room," Linda added. The hospital was dreary, but the walls with the Red Cross seemed to shield her from the painful thoughts of what had happened. The physical pain didn't seem to bother them much in the face of how much their souls were torn. Her mother rushed to the hospital half an hour after the call. She first cringed, then cursed, then cried at her daughter's bedside. Linda told her everything she had heard that morning. When Melissa left her daughter's room, she gave the nurses each a box of chocolates, and on pain of complaining to the head doctor, ordered her not to let anyone with names beginning with the letters R and K see her daughter. Linda blocked the numbers of her husband and the lying friend. She asked her mother and a colleague friend to collect her belongings from her husband's flat when he was away. Doctors said rehabilitation would take about 3 weeks and the fracture would finally heal in 3 months. One day there was a knock on the door of the room. Linda thought it was one of the staff, although they usually didn't bother to knock. "Come in," the girl shouted, not looking away from the magazine her mom had brought. "Hello, Linda," came a familiar voice. Harry stood in the doorway with a bouquet of flowers and a dressing gown thrown over his shoulders. Linda had mixed feelings when she saw her ex-girlfriend's husband. On the one hand, he reminded her of what had happened, but on the other hand, he had nothing to do with it. "You don't know how hard it took me to get here," the man complained, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "It's almost like they're checking IDs to get to you." "That's my request," Linda nodded. "Why? Are you hiding from someone?" Harry joked. "Maybe I am," the girl confirmed. Harry stared at her in surprise, his eyes wide with question and incomprehension. Linda exhaled and decided to tell him. She recalled everything, including Catherine's outings at the Institute, her consumerist attitude to men, and her hypocrisy under the mask of her friend. Harry listened with his mouth open. "I want you not to fall victim to their game like I did. Get a divorce soon and don't listen to any pleas. Don't you dare buy the salon. Catherine is using you and has used you. Linda's done." "Where did you?" A stunned Harry couldn't believe his ears. They talked about it for a long time. The girl asked the man not to tell anyone where she was or what was wrong with her, and not to do anything stupid that would ruin his life. Towards the end, when Harry was about to leave, he asked, "Linda, tell me, do I have a chance?" "Not now," she shook her head. "I want to be alone. Maybe, in the future, maybe." "I get it. Get well soon. I'll be stopping by if you don't mind." Harry nodded. "Come over." She blinked, showing agreement. Time goes differently in a small town than it does in a big city. It's measured and quiet. The hustle and bustle is alien to those who are used to getting up to the crowing of the rooster. A light frost touched the rowan berries, which shone brightly against the snow. The snow itself sparkled in the sunlight, still fresh and unmarred by anyone's feet and paws. "Granddaughter, there's a letter for you," Grandmother Emma shouted, coming into the hay and waving the envelopes. "Thank you," Linda shouted from the kitchen. She was preparing a simple breakfast for herself and Grandma. "It's been a long time since I've seen a letter," Grandma Emma said, sitting down on her stool. "You young people are all calling now. A letter from some fiancé." She handed Linda an envelope. She took a quick glance at the sender's name and decided to read it later. After her recovery, Linda went straight to her grandmother's house in the country. She could not stay in the city, where every street reminded her of the betrayal and shame she had experienced. She quit her job, settled other minor issues, and made her mother her representative in the divorce proceedings so that she would not have to face Ray again. Out of sight, out of mind, her mother said as she saw her off. Go as far as you like and come back as often as you like. Only call me often. It was quiet in the village, where the pain began to subside and gradually recede. Time was doing its work healing the wounded soul. Her mother didn't talk about Ray and the divorce, only promised to tell me when it was all over. The envelope had an address and Harry's name on it. How he knew where to find her remained a mystery. Linda ran her eyes over the lines Harry had written about the divorce, about leaving Catherine with almost nothing. She consciously skipped that part of the letter. Dear Linda, I realize I'm probably an extra person in your life, but since that evening in the cafe, you haven't left my mind. I've made a lot of mistakes and missed a lot of chances, but I don't want to let you go. The girl paused, listening to herself. Something faintly trembled in her after those words. I'm willing to wait as long as you say. I hope for a reply, Harry. Linda folded the letter, tucked it away in an envelope, and began to twirl it in her hands. If she was still in doubt at the hospital, she knew for sure now. Grandma Emma came into the room. Do you think what to write back? Questioned the old woman, looking at the concentrated face of her granddaughter. I think that old admirers are not invited to a new life. Linda smiled at her grandmother as she tore open the envelope. She tossed the scraps into the bin and looked out the window. Grandma, the neighbors here probably to ask about Daisy again. They're so restless. They'll heal the animal. The old woman shook her hands and shuffled into the hay.